Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Hellbent in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, Kick Me Like a Stray. Somehow Sakura unfreezes first. Naruto. The call is quiet, calm. Kakashi only hears the hairline tremble of terror in it because of how well he knows her. Yep. Naruto responds, more fearful gulp than word. Come here, Sakura says and beckons, in a small, unobtrusive movement to the space between her and Sasuke. The blonde Jinchuriki defers to her, read on the situation instantly, stepping backward slowly without breaking eye contact with the three Konohinen in front of him. The moment he's reached Sasuke and Sakura, Kakashi moves in front of all three of them. It's foolish. Asuma has already seen them and it's not like he can't go around Kakashi to get to them, but... Mine, do not touch, do not look, my kids. Kakashi's mind snarls and snaps. Holy shit, breathes Genma, and he sounds utterly shell-shocked, but he's still shuffling his feet to a textbook-ready brace, and Reida begins slowly moving to flank them, sliding one hand to the hilt of his sword, and Asuma is staring at Kakashi with a rapidly darkening look. Kakashi hasn't been hound in months, but he feels like a cornered dog. Hello, Kakashi. Asuma's voice is controlled but barely. The tall, dark-haired Jonin tucks his hands in his pocket as he examines them. If Kakashi hadn't run missions with the other Jonin more than a dozen times, if he hadn't sparred with him even more than that, if he couldn't perfectly recognize the way that Asuma's eyes flicker across his form cataloging status, weapons, weaknesses, he may think the other man relaxed. But Kakashi knows Asuma Saratobi well enough to recognize that in his pockets he is slipping those deadly chakra kunao over his knuckles. Yo, Kakashi responds, and he wants it to sound chipper, doesn't want to tip his hand and show how scared shitless he is, but... Asuma's eyes sharpen, like a hunting dog that smells blood on the breeze. Hell of a coincidence meeting you all here. Are you staying in the area? Kakashi shrugs, reaches up to scratch his cheek, and nonchalantly uses the movement to pull the eye patch that's been covering Obito's Sharingan off. All three of the Konohinen tense even further. Oh, you know, just passing through. He smiles falsely at the other Jonin. Asuma doesn't smile back. Reida takes another step toward their flank, and Genma slowly reaches into his weapons pouch and draws a senbon. Sensei. It's Naruto. Of course, it's Naruto. His voice trembles audibly, and Kakashi feels the boy's hand reach and grab the back of his shirt. Kakashi almost closes his eyes to try and wrestle down the wave of panic that threatens to overwhelm him. He has never been this afraid. Not during the Konobe Bridge mission, not during the Ninetales attack, not during Rin's abduction. He's never been threatened with a loss of this magnitude. It's okay, Naruto, he responds, and he doesn't try to force his voice to be cheerful because all three of his pups would see right through it anyway. Asuma sneers at him. I already knew you were a liar, hound, but I wouldn't have guessed you're a fool too. Kakashi doesn't dignify the insult with a response, but Naruto, hand still buried in Kakashi's shirt, snarls, low and threatening. Easy, Sakura murmurs to her volatile teammate. Kakashi has to find a way for them all to get out of this. He has to. Here's the deal, Asuma interrupts, all four of you can either come with us quietly and alive, or you can come with us quietly and dead. Your call, hey, take. Sasuke sucks in a sharp breath between his teeth, and Kakashi hears the way Sakura's fists tighten with the creak of her gloves. Nearly parallel with them now, Reida's sword slips out of its sheath, long and dark and deadly in his hands. The silver-haired Jonin takes a deep breath and quiets the pacing, frenetic monster that is his mind. Find a way out of this, he commands himself. Figure out what's best. They are facing two of the most skilled assassins in the entirety of Konoha's ranks and one of her most dangerous Jonin. Kakashi knows for a fact that Asuma's name had been tossed around as a candidate for the head after Hiruzen retired. He's easily as dangerous as Kakashi himself. Genma and Reida aren't slouches either, both once on Minato's War Guard and then on Hiruzen's Crisis Guard, both with more kills to their name than any Nanambu combatant in Konoha's forces. His kids are strong. All three of them are terrifyingly strong, in fact. But they are only children, and for all their training they have still barely seen real combat, and Kakashi cannot lose them. He will not gamble that their progress is enough to see them through this fight, not with their lives on the line. He once would have doubted that Asuma with his warm hands and terrible nicotine addiction and laugh like a summer storm could kill genin, kill children. Asuma was good where Hound was not. Asuma was beloved by his comrades and Kakashi was called friend killer. Asuma hadn't ever been broken so thoroughly that he was made exclusively of sharp edges. Asuma was going to be Hokage someday and Hound was going to be dead. But now, standing before the other Jonin, Kakashi can see that the men they once were have fundamentally changed. Hound may be gone but Kakashi is here and he is loved and healing and is going to fight no matter what. And in this instance, Asuma is more than willing to kill children. His decision made. Kakashi commands, voice gentle but firm, kids, head north. I'll catch up. Absolutely not, snaps Sasuke. It wasn't a suggestion Sasuke, Kakashi returns, gaze flicking between the three threats in front of them. Sensei? You're sure? That's Sakura and she sounds afraid but she also sounds present and level-headed still, thank all the gods. Kakashi nods once sharply and then with all the weight, all the certainty he can muster he promises, I will see you soon. There is a pause and he won't look away from Asuma but he can feel the silent argument his team is having behind him. He can only hope that Sakura's rationality will outweigh her stubbornness, that Sasuke's need to keep his teammates safe will be greater than his fear of losing anyone ever again, that Naruto will think things through beyond that unflinching desire to never back down an inch. Kakashi knows that at least in Naruto's case he can depend on Kurama encouraging the boy to run. The fox seems to prioritize his Jinchuriki's well-being over anything else and besides, he's never liked Kakashi. Finally, the young members of Team 7 seem to reach an agreement. All three of them, terrified, with every right to refuse him, to demand to stay at his side, listen. He doesn't turn his eyes from the threat to look but he hears them begin to retreat. Their trust in him will never fail to astound Kakashi. It will never fail to make him feel that all the pain he's endured, all the blood on his hands and all the jagged edges to his soul, are worth it. You don't think I'll let them just run do you Kakashi? Asuma asks incredulously. You'll have to go through me to stop them, is his even response. He means it too, he'll die before he lets Asuma and that black hate swimming in his eyes anywhere near Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura. With pleasure the other Jonin hisses and Kakashi bares his teeth right back at him, half smile, half grimace, sharp-fanged and furious. Yo Asuma, Naruto, the Uchiha, and the girl are getting away, Genma drawls, rocking back on his heels and stretching lazily, the steel of his senbon glinting in the light of the falling sun. You and Reito go get them. Hound is mine. Kakashi stiffens. He's good but he can't stop all three of the ninja before him from following after his team. Sure thing boss, was totally hoping to skewer some genin today anyway, Genma says flippantly. There is far too much cheer in his voice considering the situation and far too much sarcasm considering the way Asuma glares at him in response. The assassin rolls his eyes and then steps to the side and warily begins to move past Kakashi. He's going to have to let them go, Kakashi realizes. He is going to have to trust his kids to outrun Reito and Genma or hide or something, because the alternative is that Kakashi tries to fight all three of the ninja before him at the same time and Wolf may be one of the best, but those odds aren't good. If he gambles and loses Asuma, Genma, and Reito will walk over his corpse on their way to hunt down his team. It's not ideal, in fact it's terrifying, but as he watches the two Takubetsu Jonin edge around him carefully Kakashi realizes it's the best chance Team 7 has to get out of this alive, really the only chance. Divide and conquer, or he hopes at least divide and disorient. He lets Reito and Genma leave. Foolish as it may be, Kakashi takes his gaze off Asuma for just a moment to watch as they dart down the street in the direction that the rest of Team 7 ran. Kakashi cannot stop himself from straining his eyes against the falling light of the sun for a last glance of Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura as his kids reach the edge of the nearby woods and vanish into the trees. Kakashi swears to himself with every fiber of his being that it will not be the last he sees of them. He turns back to Asuma. Time to focus on the problem at hand. The taller man's hands have been removed from his pockets and just as Kakashi predicted, his signature chakra kunao are mounted across the bridges of each of his knuckles. You're going to die here, Asuma's voice is dark and cruel. You seem awfully sure of that, Kakashi snarks back, flicking his eyes around the bright street, taking in anything and everything that could be used as an advantage. Asuma paces towards him, his blades swimming in wind chakra so dense that it almost looks solid. If one of those kunao gets too close to him, Kakashi knows he's fucked. With the power that Asuma can put behind a slash of his signature weapon, no armor, no block can stand a chance. I am sure the other Jonin replies, and Kakashi fights back a wave of concern at the certainty that pours from him. Stepping backward, always keeping the Sharingan on Asuma, Kakashi gives a considerate hum as if the other man has said something very intriguing. Oh? And why is that, he asks, all nonchalance, all ease, all. 2 reasons. 1. In all our years sparring you only beat me when I couldn't get a hit in on you. Who's to say you'll be able to hit me now? Kakashi challenges. He's trying to remain unaffected by the mind games, but he feels like he's missing something, feels like something is wrong. I already have, Asuma answers, and his eyes flick to just behind Kakashi's shoulder. Kakashi's heart drops. He twists, tries to move out of the way. He isn't fast enough. Kakashi has been severely injured in his checkered 27 years more times than he can count. He's broken his arms, legs, ribs, his skull. He has been so chakra depleted that he sent himself into cardiac arrest. He's been poisoned, drowned, electrocuted, burned, beaten within an inch of his life, and stabbed so many times that if he had a ryo for each one he could buy enough copies of Ika Ika to fill a library. But nothing hurts quite like a blow from Asuma Saratobi. A lifetime of pain has taught Kakashi to move with the hit instead of against it. That instinct is the only thing that saves his arm. The clone that Asuma must have made when Kakashi was distracted for that single moment scores across his back, slicing so deeply into his left shoulder that he feels muscles part and separate all the way to bone. Kakashi flips away, sloppily dodging the original Asuma, who darts forward to swing at his injured form. He lands cleanly and immediately tests the mobility of the shoulder. The bad news is if he tries to fight with that arm, tries to put any significant pressure on it, it's going to tear the muscles worse and might even rip the fucking thing off. The good news is that he can probably still make hand signs. Maybe. Slowly. Fuck. His eyes are beginning to spot with gray and he can feel cold sweat breaking out on his forehead as his body tries to shut down. In a trick learned back when he was 13 and new to Umbu, Kakashi releases a deluge of lightning chakra through his body. The electricity hops from cell to cell, resetting pain receptors and refocusing him. It hurts, but at least he's not going into shock anymore. He can't afford distractions like that because Asuma has closed the distance again and both him and his shadow clone swing at Kakashi with those deadly, glowing blades. Kakashi is feeling very grateful for the amount of time he's spent dodging Yujito's rending claws in spars over the last few months. All that practice is proving to be a literal lifesaver right now. He ducks and weaves, stepping back and then using the angle of the bright sun behind him swipes at the clone in a moment when it's blinded. The puff of white smoke as it vanishes feels like an empty victory in the face of the blood pouring down his back. Wolf may be used to pain, but he doesn't take strikes without incurring substantial damage usually. If Asuma hits him again. Sensing that he won't be able to hit Kakashi again like this, the other Jonin switches strategies and raises his hands to begin flashing through hand signs. It's not so fast that Kakashi doesn't know what's coming, but even still, when the other man summons a wave of fire and sends it crashing towards him, he barely moves quickly enough to counter. His hands are so much slower than normal, so much clumsier, and even though he manages to summon a wall of earth to block the flames, it's a near thing. The fight has just started and Kakashi is already in a bad spot. His shoulder and arm are screaming in pain and blood is beginning to soak down the back of his shirt. The wound is slowing him down, a lot. Slow is bad. Slow means he won't be able to make hand signs fast enough to do ninjutsu without Asuma attacking him, and slow means if he tries to run to draw him away then Asuma would catch him and he can't just flee outright because then the other man would go after the kids. Worse than the arm, than the blood loss, he's distracted. Whereas a fight like this would usually focus him, bring his mind to that keen, deadly edge he's honed over time, right now Kakashi is scattered. Afraid. At this rate, Obito's Sharingan catches the barest change in the swirl of the lingering smoke from Asuma's jutsu, and it's the only warning Kakashi gets as the other Jonin charges around the side of his mud wall and swings for his head with one of the chakra kunao. Kakashi drops into a crouch and feels the blade take off a few strands of his silver hair with how near it passes. He snaps a kick towards Asuma's knee, and while it connects, it's not as hard as Kakashi wants it to be. Still, the moment of pause as Asuma stumbles from the blow is precious. Kicking off the wall behind him, Kakashi manages to spring somewhat shakily over Asuma's head. He pushes away, rolls, and comes up panting 10 feet away. Good news, he's no longer stuck between a hard wall and a very pissed off Jonin who knows most of his moves. Bad news, as he comes up from his roll, Kakashi feels something in his shoulder snap. His left hand immediately begins to go numb. Kakashi is in trouble. You said there were 2 reasons that you're definitely going to kill me. Kakashi can hear the desperation in his own voice and so can Asuma. The former member of the 12 Guardians turns to him with a sneer, the smoke from his fire jutsu still rolling thick in the charged air between them. Buying a few extra moments of breath, he mocks. Kakashi would shrug, but seeing as his arm is only a few strands of determined muscle away from giving up the ghost, he settles on tilting his head side to side in a so-so motion. Just curious. Just buying time to figure out something, anything. Asuma's sneer falls off his face and is replaced with a rage so scalding, so absolute, that Kakashi nearly flinches. You would think with a look like that he had killed someone. My father is dead because of you, you traitor, Asuma tells him with venom dripping from every syllable. Ah, thinks Kakashi, and then eloquently, again, fuck. I didn't kill Hiruzen, he tries, knowing it isn't enough but at a loss of what else to say. Really, anything to keep Asuma talking instead of trying to take his head off is good in his book. You may as well have put the sword through his chest yourself, the Jonin hisses and begins stalking towards Kakashi again. Kakashi doesn't know what to do. He's badly hurt and honestly, at this moment, outclassed. Broad daylight, open ground, plain sight is not Wolf's battlefield. He doesn't have a plan, can't think of a plan. Minato or Sakura or Obito, always Obito, would have 1,000 strategies to level the playing field. Meanwhile, Kakashi may be smart but he is a creature of instinct not tactics, and even with his death steadily approaching him wearing the face of a man Kakashi would have once called a friend, the only thing he can think about is if his kids are safe. As they circle each other, like wary predators looking for weaknesses, Asuma's face twists again. He was always kind to you, my dad, he says it almost conversationally, but the bitterness, the venom, underneath is stark. He was there for you after the White Fang died, and after Obito and Rin and the Lord Fourth too. I know that more than once he wiped black marks from your record and covered up instances when you broke. He was good to you and you paid him back by betraying everything he loved. Suddenly, for the first time in months, worries for his kids vanish from Kakashi's mind. Somewhere buried deep in his psyche, tucked under layers and layers of love and pride and concern for Naruto, Sakura, Sasuke, and all the others who now call Uzushio home, a part of Kakashi is boiling. It has been for a long time now. Somewhere under all his concern for others, Kakashi realizes, he is furious for the little silver-haired orphan who was swallowed whole by the Konoha war machine. For the child he once was. Kind to me, huh, he murmurs and he barely recognizes his own voice. Asuma's gaze narrows. The pain in Kakashi's arm, the growing numbness in his hand, is gone. It's been replaced by a feeling in his chest like magma forcing its way up through cracked earth. Old Hiruzen did hide a lot of breakdowns from my record. I should have been off active duty after 3 and I had a total of 18 if I remember right, 14 from after I had been forced into Umbu. You weren't forced, you volunteered. Snarls Asuma. Both my immediate superiors told me to join only weeks after I put my arm through my best friend's chest at fucking 12 years old. I was forced. Kakashi's voice is rising and so is that boiling feeling. It spreads through his veins and crawls up his throat. Hiruzen was your father but he was my wielder because to him, Hound was nothing but a bloody sword to be swung. Asuma, in you eyes being a Konoha has always been a thing of honor, of duty, but for me it was a short road to an early fucking grave. So don't you dare for a second try and tell me how to feel about the late Lord Third. Hound, you're going to regret those words. Asuma promises, the blaze of chakra around his kunai growing even brighter in his indignant rage. Hound died. Kakashi snarls, and with his undamaged hand he draws a kunai. When this is over, when I've won and you drag your sorry skin back to Konoha and they ask about me, you can tell them that these days I answer to Wolf. Neither shinobi waste more breath on words, after all, there is nothing left to say. Instead they hurl themselves at each other across the surface of the sun-dyed street. Nearly a mile away and getting farther every passing second, Naruto feels like he's going to throw up. Or maybe fall out of the trees he and Sakura and Sasuke are leaping between. Or maybe pass out first and then fall out of the trees. They left Kakashi-sensei behind. They left him behind with Asuma, who radiated killing intent and smelled of a fury so absolute that Naruto thinks Kurama would be impressed. That is, if Kurama wasn't so exhausted, wasn't barely conscious because of how scared Naruto is and how much the seal is faltering under the weight of that fear. Things are bad. Things are so bad. Naruto's feet find purchase on a branch and he comes to a jerking halt. His fingers dig into the bark underneath him as he tries and fails to fill his lungs through the jagged, stabbing pain of the 8 trigrams. Running here from Uzushio had been fine. Jumping 3 stories in the air to the inn window had been fine. But throw in a little bit of peril, a little bit of stress, and he can't even talk without puking like a baby. Some impressive ninja he is, huh? A rush of annoyance/reassurance/ get it the fuck together kid pours from his connection with Kurama. No words though. Naruto isn't the only one too fucked up by the reverberations of the 8 trigrams to talk apparently. Still, his fox is right. Fighting through the agony and self-loathing, Naruto tunes back into what's going on with his team. Sasuke has dropped to the branch that Naruto is crouched on, and as the Jinchuriki turns to look at him, the other boy carefully places a glowing hand on the side of his ribs. As the gentle green glow of healing chakra lights up between them, Naruto finds that the tightness in his lungs eases some. Because of the healing or Sasuke's proximity, he couldn't say. Sorry, Naruto murmurs, shame rising again even with Kurama's previous correction. He's causing so many problems for his team, putting them in danger. He hates it. Shaking his head, Sasuke sends him an exasperated look. His red eyes drift over Naruto, using the penetrative power of the Sharingan to study his chakra flow for ways to lessen the strain of the 8 trigrams on his system. Don't apologize for something that's not your fucking fault. We're not mad. We're your team. It's our job to keep you safe. Stop freaking out and rest for a few seconds while Sakura plans. Gaze focusing, catching on to some irregularity or other even as he lectures, Sasuke shifts his hand lower on Naruto's side and the green light grows brighter for a beat. The pain of his seal fades even further, and God's Naruto is so grateful for both Sasuke's words and his healing that he wants to kiss him, which isn't honestly that much of a change from the norm, but still. Sakura, meanwhile, isn't paying attention to them. Perched on the branch above, her eyes are focused on the middle distance and her lips move slightly though no sound comes out of her mouth. She's planning, shifting through a half-dozen strategies and scenarios in the span of seconds. Naruto and Sasuke both wait to hear what she'll say. Finally the Pink's gaze sharpens, drops to them. We're going to have to fight. The statement is caught somewhere between determined and resigned. Naruto can't, Sasuke snaps in response instantly, and Naruto really wants to argue, wants to assert that he feels better now, and he's not some useless, helpless civilian but even with Sasuke's help, Kurama's chakra is still fluctuating and groaning in him, and the 8 trigrams is still screaming with fiery pain, and what feels like every cell in his body is announcing that, hello, something is wrong. In all honesty, staying in the tree is already proving difficult, so Sasuke may have a point about the fighting. Yes, I do have eyes, thanks, retorts Sakura, waving a hand at Naruto's everything, before taking a deep breath and pushing on. It'll have to be you and me, Sasuke, and we're going to have to separate Genma and Reidu and take them on individually. Why? Normally, Naruto knows that Sasuke wouldn't be this confrontational, wouldn't doubt and challenge Sakura's calls, but they just left their sensei alone to fight a man who so clearly wants him dead, and none of them are exactly operating at their best at the moment. Didn't you watch the way they moved? Sakura demands, attention split as she rolls up the sleeves of her haori and begins to check that the lines of the sentinel are all still as they should be. They were perfectly in sync, perfectly aware of each other instinctively. She looks up, meets their gazes one and then the other. We have to fight them separately because they're going to be stronger together. Naruto speaks, though his voice is still croaky and slurred at the edges. But we're stronger together too, he says. But I'm terrified to leave either of you behind, he doesn't say. Sakura stands, we are, she agrees, but right now, your seal can't handle combat like this. If we want to live, if we want to win, we're going to have to be strong enough alone. They don't have any more time to argue with her, to doubt her, because breaking through the trees less than 100 yards away are the shinobi in question. Now that he's looking, Naruto can see what Sakura meant about the pair's synchronicity. Genma and Reita flow as easily and comfortably together as two halves of a double-sided sword. Perfectly balanced and twice as deadly for it. Sakura. Sasuke demands shortly. I've got Reita. You take Naruto and keep moving north. Genma is fast. Be ready with the Sharingan and warn the Nikomata that he's going to be hard to pin down. Fine. Give me some cover, would you? She asks, and Sasuke doesn't have to ask for clarification. All three of them know each other too well for that by now. At this moment, that fact is not as much of a comfort as it usually is for Naruto. Sasuke spins towards the leaf nin, closing in on them. Flashing through hand signs that Naruto has watched him practice 100 times on the craggy, less flammable upper slopes of Ozu's mountain, he summons a massive, scalding fireball and sends it hurling towards Genma and Reita. There is no time for Naruto to argue more, no time to exchange goodbyes, no time to demand that Sakura stay safe. As soon as the jutsu flies from Sasuke's lips, his teammate is hurling herself in its wake, using its blinding heat to block her approach from view. Reita, so focused on not getting burned to death, doesn't see her until the pinkette slams into his chest. Both of them go tumbling backwards and towards the forest floor, Genma's shocked shout of "Rai!" following them down. Naruto tries to crane his neck to see where they've landed, to see that Sakura is still okay, but suddenly there is a burst of summoning smoke and he finds himself atop the white-furred shoulders of Yuji, one of the Nikomata. Sasuke is already moving, leaping headlong into a dash northward, and Yuji is following without question. Behind them, Genma curses loudly and hesitates for only a moment before continuing after them. Following the Jinchuriki, likely just as Sakura had predicted. Naruto has no choice but to let himself be the bait. He has no choice but to let his team protect him. As of now, all he can do is bury his shaking, weakened fingers into thick white fur and pray that Sakura, and Kakashi, and Sasuke are going to be strong enough while he can't be. Chapter 32, All That We Are. Tokoshi's main street has been rendered a mess of craters and smoke, upturned earth, and scorch marks. Citizens of the town are scattering from the area like ants before a gale as the falling sun lends an air of weight to the whole scene, of scarlet finality. In the midst of the destruction, Kakashi and Asuma are still standing, circling others like wary predators. Despite the exhaustion they are feeling, both men have far too much experience as shinobi to be breathing heavily. Even Kakashi, bleeding severely and fighting back shock at every turn, is still steady-pulsed and level-paced. Despite the calm of battle, despite the simplicity, Asuma is beginning to look nervous. Kakashi should be at a disadvantage. Really, he shouldn't even be standing. The man once called Hound is badly injured and only has one blade, one hand, to Asuma's two. Yet as they spin into each other's spaces again to trade blows, ducking, and weaving and colliding and springing apart in the dying light, Asuma is starting to falter, to step back. His expression is growing more and more agitated with each passing minute. Both Jonin know that Kakashi should have gone down a long time ago. Only one of them knows why he hasn't. Kakashi, for all his determination to survive and get back to his kids, is quickly running out of options. He's injured and his ability to use any of the thousands of jutsu he's copied is severely compromised by the state of his arm. He's already exhausted a lot of chakra just to manage his bleeding and to keep Asuma from taking his head off his shoulders. His usually crowded tool belt of abilities is currently limited to his righteous fury, the eye that his most precious person once gave him, and a really bad idea. Man, and he had lectured Sakura on the absolute idiocy of testing new techniques in the heat of battle less than a week ago. Nothing for it now though, no time for caution. With his remaining chakra levels and the rate of his blood loss, Kakashi knows he's only going to get one chance to get this right. The silver-haired Jonin closes the Sharingan and begins to focus. Not giving him space to try anything, Asuma dashes into his space. The other man has always been impressively quick for his size, and damn it all if it isn't making Wolf's life difficult right now. Kakashi snarls in frustration and in preparation to flip backwards to avoid another devastating swing of Asuma's chakra blades, just as he has been doing this whole fight. Avoiding, dodging. Creating an expectation. Because that is what makes Kakashi Hatake dangerous above anything else. Not strategy or strength or skill. But instinct. And Kakashi's gut has been telling him that if he just holds out, just keeps moving, keeps forcing Asuma to chase. There, preparing for Kakashi's retreat, Asuma extends the reach of his strike a little farther than he should, stretching in attempt to get the blow to land. In compensation, his stance is unsteady, his guard weakened. It leaves an opening, tiny, but enough for Wolf. Kakashi is already trapped in the early momentum of a backflip, and for most ninja that would mean they couldn't adjust in time, but the last Haytake has been doing this morbid, bloody dance since he was 6. Bending backwards into a straining arch, injured shoulder screaming at the pull of his muscles from the movement, Kakashi lets Asuma's swing pass over his face by centimeters, and then before the other Jonin can recover his even footing, he twists sideways, raises a leg, and using the full force of his chakra, momentum, and rage, he slams a kick into Asuma's side. The taller man goes flying, crashing into the side of a nearby building with an explosion of dust that blankets the street and mingles with the lingering smoke. The hit is enough to slow Asuma down for a few seconds, but it won't stop him. Kakashi knows that he has only moments. He flashes through hand signs as fast as his shaking, numbing left hand will allow him to. His first jutsu is done quickly, but not quickly enough, because Asuma is already climbing out of the hole his body has left in the building, eyes murderous, and Kakashi still hasn't finished the hand signs for Chidori. Kakashi rushes, vision spotting with darkness as he fumbles through the painfully familiar signs. The numbness in his hand is nearly absolute. He is too slow. Sensing weakness, Asuma closes the distance in only a blink. The other Jonin thunders into his space. With all the delicacy of a landslide to his movements, Asuma wins a fist back, and with a snarl of, "This is for my dad, you fucking monster," he slams his blade fist straight into the center of Kakashi's ribcage. Kakashi gasps, chokes. His eyes fly wide and panicked as blood gushes from his lips, his lungs all but shredded as he stares in horror at Asuma's grim face only inches from his. And then, Kakashi gives the other Jonin a bloody smile. "You know they call me the Kopinin for more than just my sherry non. I liked your trick with the shadow clone," he says, and promptly dissipates in a burst of white smoke. The sound of 1,000 birds splits the sun-dyed silence of the street from behind Asuma's unprotected back. The Leaf Jonin starts to twist to the side desperately, but Kakashi, the real Kakashi, has Kamui now, and Asuma doesn't have a chance in hell. Using the Mangekyo's new form to transport into the shadows of the nearby ally and then back once Asuma had been sufficiently distracted by the bait of the shadow clone had been a gamble, to say the least. Kamui eats chakra faster than Naruto eats ramen, and if he had fucked it up, the ability would have killed Kakashi before Asuma could. But it worked, and now, with his last dregs of chakra and all the rage of a lifetime of mistreatment by the Leaf, Kakashi sinks a Chidori enclosed kunai into Asuma's shoulder. The lightning arcs through Asuma's body even as Kakashi buries the kunai to the hilt, and the man he once would have killed for, maybe would have died for, drops like a stone. Kakashi stumbles back, panting and vision swimming. He won. He's almost completely out of chakra, his arm is fucked, and he honestly might black out at any moment, but he still won. He beat the odds. He kept his promise. Wolf closes his eyes and takes a long, deep breath. For a few minutes there he had thought, but he didn't, and that's what matters. He has far too many miles ahead of him to die yet, far too many people depending on him. The rushed, nearing footsteps are too quiet to catch his attention, but the accompanying chakra signatures are loud enough to break Kakashi from his musings. Tsunade and Shizune skid to a stop a dozen paces away, faces tense and hastily prepared travel packs over their shoulders. The Sannin lets out a long impressed whistle as her brown eyes rake over the scene, and then nodding towards Asuma she asks, "Is he dead?" Kakashi starts to shake his head in negation and then immediately regrets it as the street bends and spins around him. Shizune is at his side in an instant, supporting him expertly without putting any pressure on his mangled shoulder. "Where is my nephew and the Fuinjutsu girl and the Uchiha punk?" Tsunade asks, pointedly not watching as her apprentice lifts a hand and begins to forcibly slow the bleeding of Kakashi's wound. Woods to the north, Kakashi grits from behind clenched teeth. Slapdash medical jutsu hurts like a bitch. There are 2 other Leaf shinobi after them. Assassins. Tsunade frowns and then, rolling up the sleeves of her green haori, she walks to Asuma's unconscious body and, as if he weighed nothing, lifts and slings him over her shoulder. She looks back at Kakashi and Shizune, a dangerous light in her eyes. "Well, we best catch up and return this to them then." Rada lands on his feet, tense and ready for movement. He immediately settles into a defensive crouch, drawing Kokuto, and resting the sword carefully at his side. The pink-haired genin who knocked him from the trees, Sakura Harano, drops to the ground a half-dozen paces away from him. She rises smoothly from her own crouch, eyes locked on him and face impassive. Thankfully it appears that Genma has kept his head on his shoulders well enough to continue on after the Uchiha and Naruto as the mission calls. Rada will have to stay here and wrap this up quickly so that he doesn't leave his partner alone against a Jinchuriki and a genius for too long. The assassin studies the young woman in front of him just like she's studying him. He had never paid particular attention to Sakura when she was still in Konoha, but even he can see that she's changed over her months on the run. The young woman's pink hair is braided back tightly away from her face in a style he hasn't seen since Kushina was active in the field. Gone is the red dress she'd once preferred, replaced by choices more simple and efficient. She wears a long-sleeved haori in a blue so dark it's nearly black paired with silk armor leggings and sturdy shinobi sandals. The clothes and hair are the lesser of the things that seem to have changed about Sakura. The way she moves, silent and controlled, has the hair at the back of Rada's neck cling with unease. She doesn't move like a genin, but like Anko, like Genma, and like himself. She moves like an assassin. Rada likes to think that he is a good man. He strives to be honest, thoughtful, and kind. He tips well at restaurants and always saves kitchen scraps to feed to the stray cat that lives near his apartment, and he doesn't hurt children. But above all that, he is a loyal shinobi and his orders are to bring this girl back into Konoha's fold no matter what, so he will do so. Sakura Harano, he begins, adopting the voice of a superior officer. She cocks her head at the tone, eyes bright. You will surrender and return to the leaf or I will be required to use force. If you go peacefully things will be easier for you back home. She remains silent, and so slipping a note of concern and empathy into his voice he tacks on, your parents miss you. Rada truthfully has no idea if her parents miss her. He hasn't spoken to them. But surely the idea of them will pull on this girl's heartstrings. The girl in question considers him, those strange jade eyes shining in the shadows of the twisted trees of T's landscape. For a brief moment before he dismisses the feeling as ridiculous, the Takubetsu Jonin feels like a mouse under the gaze of a hawk. Finally she replies, is that how you talk to all your enemies? Rada does not allow himself to tense, but it's a near thing. You are my comrade, a fellow ninja of the leaf. I don't want you to be my enemy, he offers into the space between them. Sakura doesn't soften at the olive branch he extends. Her gaze stays on him, sharp as a kunao and twice as quick even as her voice is calm, collected. And I didn't want to run into you or your squad mates, but here we are. Let's not waste time on theoreticals or pipe dreams. I am not your comrade. I defected from Konoha and neither I nor my team are going back. Sakura-chan, I don't know why you three felt the need to flee, but whatever story Kakashi has spun for you, whatever you think you know dash. The cold focus she's held until now flares with sudden heat. What Kakashi told us? You think we left because he told us to? Rada feels suddenly, inexplicably, like he's treading on dangerous ground. He nods in affirmation before asking, carefully, if he didn't, who did? Sakura laughs. It's a sound like a razor, flat and sharp and dangerous. She slides one foot backwards across the forest floor to settle into a battle stance, and even with the covering of dry leaves, the movement is silent. You're asking the wrong questions, Rada-san. Instead of asking who made us leave, maybe you should be considering what did. Without giving him time to ponder her words, Sakura brings her fists forward and bends her knees. Her stance is perfect, all measured strength and deadly readiness. Rada can see the time for conversation is over. He registers her intentions a moment before she springs at him. Talented as she may be, the girl is still a child, and Rada has nearly 2 decades of experience fighting for his life against men and women far more dangerous than she'll ever be. As she closes on him, Rada whirls Kokuto up from his side. He coats the blade in a flare of chakra to dull its deadly edge as he does so. The assassin may be willing to follow orders and break this girl, to make her bleed, to drag her home kicking and screaming, but he won't kill her. He would never be able to look his loved ones in the eyes again if he did. That doesn't mean he's going to let her get away unscathed though. He spins, light on his feet and steady in his hands, and slams the full strength of his blade against Sakura as she swings for his chest with a clenched fist. She's quick, managing to see the blow coming at the last second and bringing her arms up into a cross block to brace against the impact. However, Rada knows from both experience and from the pain that instantly twists across her young features that no matter how good your form is, human bones can only take so much force. He had to learn the hard way as a genin that a strong block isn't a shield, isn't a wall. It's simply a stopgap to buy yourself spare time, and eventually that block, that time, runs out. Sakura is going to have to learn just like he did, he thinks, as his katana, familiar as an extension of his own arm, sings in his grip. If he has to break her arms to make the lesson stick, then so be it. While she's still on her back foot from the first strike, he whirls, brings the blade low and then twists it high at the last moment, aiming for a temple strike. Sakura snarls and, faltering back another step, manages to shift again, catching the dulled blade on her forearm instead of the side of her head. Rada can almost hear the hairline fractures forming in her bones. While pushing back against Kokuto fiercely, Sakura reaches behind her back with her free hand and yanks forward a piece of paper with curling fuinjutsu painted across its surface. Rada recognizes the threat for what it is instantly. He's sparred with Irika enough times to know how dangerous a well-applied explosive tag or banshee seal can be. He doesn't give her a chance to demonstrate what the seal does. Faster than thought, faster than she can activate the seal, Rada flips the katana in his grip and then flicks the blade forward, slicing the paper neatly in half. Then, not giving her a chance to adjust her strategy, to try for some other trick, Rada spins the sword in a deadly wheel and slams the hilt into her chest, expelling a wave of chakra at the point of impact in an explosion of force. Sakura is thrown backwards like a rag doll, hitting the ground hard and rolling. For just a moment, Rada almost thinks he sees a faint flare of gold from under the collar of her ninja blacks, but he dismisses the information as secondary to the fact that as the girl comes to a stop, she immediately starts climbing back to her feet. She must know she's out of her depth here, Rada thinks, frowning even as he twists Kokuto through his fingers. Still, Sakura stands. She bares her teeth at him like some kind of feral animal and drops back into a battle stance, feet ready to move, arms ready to block. Rada's frown deepens. He wants to shout at her, to demand she think through things. But his mission isn't to teach this girl how to survive a fight. It's to put her on the ground. He's going to wrap this up quickly. Dragging it out just means unnecessary pain for her. Bracing his feet, Rada leaps. If his kenjutsu was fast before, it is nothing more than a blur now. Kokuto hums through the air like a swarm of hornets with a sting 100 times as acute. Sakura, so much quicker, so much calmer than a genin has any right to be, is still managing to block most of his strikes, but not all, and as Rada rains blow after blow on her and she's forced back and back and back, he realizes this fight isn't going to last much longer. The Dokabutsu Jonin swings his katana in a showy flash towards her face, and Sakura, panting now and wild-eyed, raises her shaking arms again to stop the blade. Rada feels a painful tug of guilt in his stomach as, instead of following through with the strike, he kicks her in the chest as hard as he can. For the second time in as many minutes, Sakura goes flying, this time slamming against an outcropping of rocks at the edge of the clearing with a shout of pain. She drops to the ground, somehow managing to keep standing even as her chest heaves with desperate breaths and blood begins to seep out under her hairline from where her head impacted against the rock behind her. She's barely on her feet. Rada can see the way she's clinging to consciousness by a thread from the flutter of her eyelashes, the rapid jerk of her breath, how her knees and arms are trembling. He thinks that he may have broken her ribs with that last kick, and his heart gives a lurch at the thought. He wonders how she's still standing. He wonders what kind of person it makes him that he's disappointed that she is. Sakura wavors side to side again, and she blinks those jade eyes, trying and failing to focus on him. He steps toward her, ready to deliver the blow that will knock her out completely. "Someday, you're going to be an amazing kunoichi," he tells her gently, and he means it. He doesn't even think she hears him though. He raises an arm to strike her, and as he does, Sakura's eyes roll back in her head and her legs give out. She topples forward toward the ground, and Rada is moving before he can really think about it, his kind heart reacting before his shinobi instincts can, as he reaches to catch and stop her from slamming face first into the hard stone under them. He doesn't even see the blow coming. Suddenly the girl is no longer falling. One foot slides forward to stop her forward momentum and one of her shoulders rolls into Rada's chest to knock his reaching arm wide. As the Takubetsu Jonin realizes that he's made a terrible miscalculation, Sakura hisses, voice quiet, but full of fire like he has never heard before, "I am already an amazing shinobi." And then she slams a glowing, golden fist into the center of his chest. Radu has just a moment to think with a surprising amount of peace that he's never had so many ribs break at once in his entire life, and then his brain shuts down, darkness taking him. Sakura stumbles slightly as Radu goes flying backwards across the clearing to slam into a tree and then crash to the ground where he lays still. She breathes roughly through her teeth, clenching her eyes against the stabbing, searing pain in the arm she hit Radu with. The seals on her skin are bad enough, burning at her like they were hot iron, not ink. Worse, however, she thinks as she stands up straight carefully, trying not to jostle that side too much, she's fairly certain her arm is broken. She's going to have to rework the sentinel. The reverb from expelling the absorbed force of the swordsman's strikes should not have been that intense. Unsteadily walking forward, the Sakura kneels by the unconscious Konoha-nin. Her vision is swimming rather sickeningly and it's likely that she's concussed, but she's not as fucked up as Radu is. She looks him over for a moment, reaches one hand to press against his pulse point. Good, he's not dead. Very, very injured, but not dead. Scooping up the sleek, black katana and reholstering it in the sheath on his back, Sakura grabs the collar of Rada's flak jacket and, as carefully as she can be bothered to be, begins dragging him in the direction that Sasuke and Naruto went. She hopes that her teammates will leave that other nin, Genma if she remembers right, conscious enough that he can deal with his partner. Genma has a really, really bad feeling. He's had a bad feeling since he and Rai were assigned this mission, and it's only gotten worse with every passing hour since they left Konoha. Turns out his gut was as on point as always. Out of the whole of the elemental nations, trust his luck to mean that they just happened to find the one town where fucking Sharinon no Kakashi and his Hellions were holed up. At least he can count on it being interesting. The Uchiha and Naruto are still bounding ahead of him, faster now with the aid of a concerningly large summons of some kind. Genma would say the massive white cat is an Inako, but he's noticed the twin tails, and something about the barely present, ghostly glow around the animal tells him not to put any bets on that assumption. He glances back over his shoulder for a moment. Hopefully Radu is okay. The genin who knocked him from the air is only that, a genin, but Genma has already been guilty once of underestimating the threat Team 7 can pose, and he won't fall guilty of it again. As for Asuma, Genma has to fight down a frown at the memory of the wave of vitriol that had poured from the Jonin. Asuma may not be a close friend, but he's a good shinobi and a dependable comrade. However, he also lost a lot in the wake of what Kakashi Hatake did, and Genma has to wonder how much of that pain, that grief, has gotten warped into blame. He shakes his head sharply. He needs to focus. Unlike Radu, he knows unflinchingly that his opponents are a threat. Sasuke Uchiha is a genius and Naruto is a Jinchuriki, and Genma is but one very determined motherfucker with a lot of senbon and some damn good luck. Or, maybe really shitty luck at the moment, depending on how you look at it. Either way, he has a job to do. Clearing the thick canopy of one of the larger trees, his concerns are rapidly shifted to the back of his mind, because his quarry has stopped and appears to be waiting for him. The Uchiha, Naruto, and the massive white cat, possibly a cat, are posted up on the opposite side of a natural clearing in the trees. Genma lands on the forest floor and looks up into the branches where the trio is stationed. He studies all three of his opponents carefully and quickly realizes that his original count was wrong. What he had thought was a fur ruff of some kind on Sasuke's gray vest is instead another not quite cat, this one watching him just as closely as its giant counterpart is. The whispering feeling of watch out, watch out, watch out, rises again. Genma determinedly tramps it down under a raised eyebrow and a bored expression. So are we taking a breather or? He calls across the clearing. The Uchiha doesn't respond, instead turning slightly and murmuring something that Genma doesn't catch to the massive white summons and the Jinchuriki. Naruto responds, his tone anxious even if his words are still too distant for him to hear. Sasuke nods, offers a small smile to his teammate, and then leaps from the tree to land lightly on the ground a few paces in front of Genma. The brat tucks his hands casually into his pockets and tilts his head, meeting Genma's eyes evenly. It's been a long time since the Takubetsu Jonin had a pair of Sharinan on him like this. He had almost forgotten how unsettling it is. As is his nature, he buries his discomfort under being a smartass. So is Blondie gonna hop down here too, or are you doing that Uchiha pride bullshit thing where you think you can fight me alone? He expects the anger that flashes across Sasuke's face, welcomes it in fact. Genma thrives on his opponents wanting to put him in his place, wanting to shut him up. It makes them sloppy and his senbon that much more deadly. But in this case, Sasuke's anger at his taunts, while white-hot and murderous in the moment, is quickly followed by a visible wave of calm. Genma's instincts hiss and twist in warning even as the fight in his blood rises in anticipation. Naruto isn't feeling great right now, Sasuke explains coolly, dangerous eyes never leaving Genma's own, but that's fine, because Uchiha pride bullshit or not, I'm never alone anymore. Swift as a thought he brings a hand to his mouth and with a clip of teeth and drop of blood he falls smoothly to a knee. His pale hand collides with the ground and instantly a burst of summoning smoke fills the clearing. Even as the white cloud rolls around him, Genma bares his teeth in a grin. So the kid has more than just the 2 summons under his command. It's rare for a genin to have summons at all, let alone several. The only genin Genma has ever known with multiple summons at such a young age was Kakashi Hatake, and considering that the motherfucker is this kid's sensei. Genma flips Senbon in between the fingers of both his hands and drops his weight, preparing to move at any moment. The Takubetsu Jonin has lived this long for a reason, and it's definitely not cause he's simply too charming to die, or at least not only that. He gets the feeling that he's about to be given a run for his money. Rolling the deadly, perfectly weighted needles between his knuckles and watching the smoke, Genma calls out blithely, "Summons are great, kid, real impressive, but it's gonna take more than another off-brand Ninako to put me down." The comment travels and Genma hears a peal of laughter roll from the tree where Naruto is perched. That doesn't bode well. With perfect dramatic timing, a gust of warm wind sweeps through the open space, carrying away the lingering summoning smoke. The sight that greets Genma has his grin growing, sharpening, even as his fingers tighten around his throwing needles. Sasuke Uchiha is still crouched on the ground, red eyes determined and focused on him. He is surrounded by 3 massive summons. Each of the felines is easily as big as Genma, and he can see from where he stands that their claws and teeth are long and dangerous. Each has 2 tails that swish with a predator's focus as they lock onto him, their eyes as piercing as their summoners. Sasuke rises and takes a ready stance, his hands flexing slightly as a halo of pale green light surges to life around them. Genma has to force a bark of shocked laughter back down his throat. The Uchiha kid not only has more high-level summons than most Jonin he knows of, but he's apparently a healer too, one that feels confident enough to use combative medical ninjutsu at that. What has Kakashi been feeding these kids, he wonders, and Iruka or Reita would berate him for the thrill of nearly feral, violence-honed joy he feels, but this is what Genma lives for. The assassin rolls onto the balls of his feet and softens his knees as adrenaline sings in his veins. He's not going to kill Sasuke Uchiha. He isn't interested in murdering kids, even for the village he is sworn to. But that doesn't mean he won't take every single ounce of fight that this little genius can offer him and measure it against his own speed, his own strength, against the violence that has been worn so deeply into his bones that Genma doesn't know where he begins and shinobi ends. He smirks and, meeting Sasuke's eyes with a blatant challenge, he coos, "Here kitty, kitty kitty." Chapter 33, What I'm Fighting For. Sasuke snarls in frustration. This fight is not going his way at all. Sakura had warned him that Genma was going to be fast, and while he always appreciates her insights, Sasuke feels like that had been the understatement of the fucking millennia. Kakashi is fast, Yujito is fast, Sasuke himself is fast. Genma is untouchable. Even with Ruri, Dai, and Reiji backing him, and the Sharingan to track the Takubetsu Jonin's movements, Sasuke hasn't been able to land a single hit on the other shinobi. The most damning thing of all is that as the fight progresses, Sasuke is becoming more and more certain that Genma is still treating the encounter as a game. "Whoa," the grinning man in question shouts as he leaps nimbly out of the way of Dai's swipe. The Nekomade's claws are long and sharp enough to compete with some Tanto swords, and all they need is to find purchase once and Genma will be fucked. That's proving nearly impossible though. The Leafnin bounds backwards and then, feet bracing against one of the trees at the clearing edge, he changes trajectory and flips to the side. Reiji, shifting out of the shadows where Genma would have landed had he not readjusted, lunges, teeth snapping inches away from the back of the bandana that ties the assassin's long brown hair out of his face. Genma's laughter rings through the clearing, grating, and infuriatingly buoyant. Sasuke grinds his teeth in fury. He hears Kakashi's voice in his head, reminding him that anger can be a useful tool, but if he lets it control him, then it's nothing more than a ball and chain. Sasuke steps back to reassess, to recenter himself. Reading his pause, the Nikomata also come to a stop. They pace around the edges of the clearing, their fur bristling and their eyes bright with agitation as they watch their prey. The prey in question lands neatly in the center of the open space, hands dropping to his pockets and grin unfaltering. Sasuke wants to wipe that stupid smile off his stupid face. Kakashi has really been putting you through the paces, hasn't he, kid? You and your kittens nearly got me a few times there. Scratch that, Sasuke wants to break his face so badly that he'll never smile again. A prick of tiny claws against his clavicle is enough to refocus him as Mika, still perched steadily on his shoulders, gets his attention. This isn't working. No shit, Sasuke snarls quietly back at her, watching as Genma neatly flips a senbon into his mouth and clicks it obnoxiously against his teeth. The sound is loud in the tension of the clearing, and all of the Nikomata flick their ears in agitation at the sudden noise. Genma's grin widens slightly, grows meaner. He's barely used his throwing needles so far, mostly employing them to force the Nikomata back when they get too close to landing a hit or once to make Sasuke drop the signs for his fireball jutsu. It's infuriating, and more than that, it's concerning. Ruri stalks to Sasuke's side, though her bright green eyes never leave Genma. She's not the biggest of the Nikomata that are contracted with Sasuke right now. Her back only just meets his hip, but she's smart and ruthless, and Sasuke trusts her explicitly at this point. In truth, he trusts all the Nikomata. What's the plan? Ruri hisses, her voice low enough that it won't carry. Sasuke frowns. He doesn't know. Strategy has never been his strong suit, and while it's something he's worked to improve on now that he's effectively in command of his summons, in moments like these he still feels out of his depth. Sasuke considers what his allies, his family would do in this moment. Sakura would find and exploit some weakness that only she noticed, and Naruto would try and convince Genma to back off with words and then simply overwhelm him with raw power if that didn't work. Yujito would wear the assassin down with relentless offense, and Gaara would patiently hold a strong defense until an opening presented itself. Yotakato would find a way to retreat if he couldn't take his opponent down quickly, and Kakashi would take whatever was putting him at a disadvantage and make it a strength. The strategy comes to Sasuke suddenly. He whistles sharply, infusing the sound with chakra to drive its pitch up. The sound is so high that most humans can't hear it, but summoning animals like the Nikomata certainly can. It's a trick that Kakashi taught him, and it had taken months for Sasuke to get it right. He's glad he did though, because now he has a silent method to communicate with his yokai. Dai and Reiji instantly dart to his side at the heel command. Reiji does so by ducking into the darkening, evening shadows of a nearby tree and then appearing nearly instantly at Sasuke's side, using the shadow striding ability that makes him so dangerous. Meanwhile Dai, the quickest of his front line, bounds into the trees and darts from branch to branch before landing in a crouch at his hip. Yuji also leaps down from the tree where he had been guarding Naruto and, despite his massive size, the yokai hits the ground with barely a whisper of sound. Genma watches all this with one raised eyebrow, but he doesn't make any moves towards the now vulnerable Naruto in the branches above. Good. Sasuke had thought that he wouldn't. The other shinobi seemed truly more interested in playing than trying to seriously hurt any of them, which is certainly useful for now, but who's to say how much longer it will last? Plan? Asks Dai, ever the pragmatic one of the team. Sasuke hums in acknowledgement and then, keeping his voice low, inquires, do you all remember me describing the fight in which I activated the Sharingan for the first time? In the Land of Waves. Mika nods sagely from her perch and says, yes, of course. The power of young love mission. Despite the severity of the situation they are in, all of the gathered yokai chuckle as Sasuke turns beet red instantly. Do not call it that, he hisses at his anchor summons in mortification. Mika simply bumps her cheek against his in response, giving a rumbling purr that is somewhere between laugh and affection. Face still scarlet but dedication surging at the reminder of what QHE is fighting to protect, Sasuke takes a deep breath and then explains. Haku was fast too. Maybe even faster than Genma is, but he had less experience and so his tells were easier to pick up on. I could track his movements without too much trouble and once I started doing that he panicked. Yuji, voice low and constantly on the edge of a growl, murmurs the Weasley man won't panic easily. He is, steady, if reckless. Sasuke knows that Yuji is right. The yokai is extremely good at reading people. For one, Genma is definitely Weasley with his lanky limbs and smug looks and twisting, darting movements. For two, Sasuke gets the sense that making Genma panic, making him get serious is the last thing they want. Far better to end this fight before the Takubetsu Jonin starts to seriously play. So? What do you want us to do about it, Sasuke-kun? Mika asks and Sasuke feels himself relax even further at her calm, feels his other summons do the same. Mika is small and still so young compared to the rest of the Nikomata. Her combat abilities are limited at best, as is her experience. But her humor, her calm demeanor, her genuine care, is what grounds Sasuke and the others in moments like these. Well, you don't trap a weasel where he is, Sasuke explains, and for the first time since the fight started he feels a smile curl across his face. You trap him where he's going to be. Even if we are slower than him, if we cut off all his escape routes but one. Reiji, crouched so low to the forest floor that the black of his fur blends into the darkly shadowed ground, hums, drive him into a corner. Ruri, his twin, finishes his thought, and then tear him limb from limb. Raising his Sharingan to focus on Genma, Sasuke has to fight down another smile as Mika, voice gentle if slightly reproachful corrects, let's aim to hit him first and then move to tearing his limbs off. Sasuke isn't Sakura, he doesn't have 1,000 backup strategies if this plan doesn't work. He's not Naruto, ready to power through with sheer force of will. He's not Kakashi either and, though Genma will be possible to drive where they want him because they are so much slower than him, Sasuke isn't sure if the strategy will be enough. But Sasuke is himself above all that and while he's still piecing together who exactly that is beyond the hollow, mourning, rage-driven shell he had once been, he knows one thing for certain. He will not back down when those he cares about are on the line. The Nikomata drop into readiness, turning dangerous, predatory gazes back towards the still grinning Leaf Nin. Noticing the looks Genma calls out, brainstorming done. Ruri ignores the taunt and hissing in furious determination says, I've got front as deep purple chakra blazes into existence along her claws. Left Yuji mumbles and even though his voice remains slightly mournful in its strange deepness, his twin white tails swish fiercely enough to stir tiny whirlwinds among the leaves. Behind Reiji calls, and steps backwards into a pool of shadow. That leaves the right to me, Dai says and she digs her claws deep into the soil, ready to fling herself into movement. Sasuke focuses. Allows the flow of chakra in his hands to grow keener, more cutting. If his Nekomata's claws catch Genma, the assassin is going to bleed for certain, but if Sasuke catches him, he's not going to be able to walk. He doesn't have to ask his summons if they're ready, he knows them too well for that after all these months. Instead he whistles again, using the signals specific to each of them to command them forward into battle. All four cats leap, staggered in their movements. The current goal is to narrow the paths that Genma can take, to funnel him towards predictability. Ruri moves first. The violet glow of her claws is a deadly beacon in the twilight shadows of the forest. Genma dodges easily, light on his feet and confident in his smirk. The movement, however, carries him straight into the double hammer of Dai and Yuji, both massive, both able to hit hard enough to snap bone like twigs and both bearing down on him. Genma ducks one swipe and narrowly leaps over another. Sasuke, holding back, cataloging every movement and expression the assassin wears, has to fight down a wave of triumph as the constant smirk on Genma's face falters. The assassin lands on one foot, pushing off backwards faster than a normal eye could follow. Reiji Sasuke snaps but the cat is already moving, dropping through the shadows under his paws to appear at Genma's back, claws extended. Sasuke doesn't wait to see their trap spring, doesn't wait to see what Genma's face looks like without that dimmed smirk. After all, if his summons are the trigger on the trap, Sasuke is the metal teeth, the falling anvil. He leaps. Taking a card from Sakura's book, the medic channels chakra into his feet and bounds skywards, easily clearing 10 feet vertically. As the chakra surrounding his hands intensifies, grows keener, as his arc through the air starts on its descent, he meets Genma's eyes. The Takubetsu Jonin stares at him in shock, his own body airborne from the leap he just used to clear the closing circle of Nikomata. The leap that is carrying him upward, exactly into Suzuki's path. The Sharingan pinpoints an opening at the man's hip, undefended, and Suzuki's mind whirls through medical charts and diagrams. He instantly catalogs muscle groups, chakra pathways, and vulnerable bones in that region of the body. Genma's eyes widen as Suzuki brings his green-coated, healer's hands forward in a perfect, slicing chop, fully intending to sever the Konohanin's tensor fasciae lati. It's a blow that would permanently cripple the flexibility of his knee, and most importantly, that would destroy his incredible speed. Genma's hands fly to his belt and Suzuki sees the flash of steel. He's not worried, because when Genma throws whatever blade he's drawing at him, Mika, his last line of his defense, his support where there was once free fall, will catch it and then Suzuki will put the assassin on the ground. But Genma doesn't throw the strange, three-pronged kunai he now holds at Suzuki. Instead he whips it to the side, away from all the Nikomata and him entirely, and for a moment Suzuki is sure the Takubetsu Jonin just missed somehow. But then the man vanishes in a blur. The whole exchange happens in less than a second. Suzuki hits the ground and rolls, gaining his feet with a snarl as he spins to try and find where his opponent has gone. There, halfway across the clearing, Genma is down on one knee. The tri-blade kunai is clenched tight in one, white-knuckled fist and he's breathing hard. The smirk is nowhere to be seen on his face. Instead, he's watching Suzuki back with surprise and sharp intent. Fucking shit, thinks Suzuki. Suzuki. Naruto's voice breaks through the fog of his fear, of his confusion, like sunlight through rain clouds. He doesn't take his eyes off Genma but he calls back, "You okay? Forget about me." Kurama says that was the Hiration. My dad's technique. Suzuki narrows his eyes at Genma even as the assassin tips one shoulder in a hapless shrug. Caught me. I'm nowhere as good at it as Minato was, he explains, almost apologetic, then his voice shifts to impressed. Good on you for making me use it at all though, kid. It's not usually a card I would have to pull against a brat like you. Suzuki fails to fight back. A snarl and Dai and Ruri echo him as they step to his side, Yuji and Reiji right behind them. All are waiting for his next order. This time Suzuki feels no hesitation. The Sharingan burns in his gaze and his chakra roils in his veins, as precise as a scalpel and even more cutting. No matter how fast Genma is, how many S-rank techniques he pulls, Suzuki will not lose this fight, not when he's the only thing between Genma and Naruto. Suddenly, something on the Takubetsu Jonin's face changes. Gone is the amiability, the humor, the playfulness. His eyes have shifted to deadly sharpness and his muscles relaxed to violent preparation. It's a shift that Suzuki has seen from Kakashi and Yujito several times before. The shift from person to weapon. He feels Sakura's presence before he actually hears her chakra more familiar to him than any of the Nikomata at this point, warm and steady and fierce. I'm surprised you haven't taken care of him yet, her voice rings across the clearing in a loud challenge. It's accompanied by the sound of a body hitting the ground. Suzuki flicks his eyes to the side for a moment and finds his pink-haired teammate. She's beaten and bloody and holding her arm tightly to her side in a way that doesn't bode well for the state of her bones, but she's alive. Using the Sharingan he quickly flickers over her form, cataloging injuries as precisely as possible without a hands-on evaluation. She has what is likely a partially dislocated left shoulder as well as a severely fractured humerus, muscle tearing and deep tissue bruising in both her left and right arms, and a minor or moderate concussion depending on how much of her pain she's hiding. The other Leaf Nin, Reidu, is collapsed on the ground by her side, unmoving. Suzuki checks him quickly too and has to fight down a sympathetic wince. The other shinobi isn't dead, but when some poor medic has to start repairing the absolute menagerie of fractures lacing his ribs, he may wish he was. Suzuki, yowls Dai suddenly and Suzuki's heart freezes. He turns just in time to watch Genma, eyes ice cold, hurl the strange kunai across the clearing where it sinks into the ground in front of Sakura. The assassin vanishes and Suzuki knows he won't make it in time, knows that Genma will be in Sakura's space faster than he can even command his body to move, that he can slit her throat faster than Sasuke can even bring air into his lungs to shout a warning. Still he turns, lunging desperately towards his confused-looking friend. Terror courses in his veins and the damningly familiar, pleading beat of, "Not again, not again, not again," fills his mind. Genma blurs into existence before Sakura. Her eyes widen in shock and she starts to step back, to drop into a block, but Genma is faster. Like a law of the universe, Genma is always faster, and he's whipping a hand forwards and grabbing the collar of Reida's flak jacket before yanking the other ninja against his chest in a rushed carry. He bounds backwards, out of the slashing reach of Reiji and Ruri, who have charged to Sakura's defense. Sasuke skids messily to a stop at Sakura's side, Sharingan spinning in agitation as he warily stares after Genma. The assassin isn't looking at him. Instead he has one calloused hand pressed tightly against Reida's pulse, face still as stone. A few beats of silence pass and then Genma's face crumples into stark relief. Sasuke, ears sharper than most, can still barely make it out as Genma whispers to the unconscious man in his arms, "Fuck right, I've said you aren't allowed to scare me like that." When the Takubutsu Jonin looks back up at them, the serrated, unflinching, uncaring ice is gone from his eyes, and while the playfulness of earlier hasn't returned, Sasuke feels himself relax slightly. "You really did a number on my teammate here," Genma yells to Sakura. She tips a shoulder in a shrug, and Sasuke can see the way she's fighting down a wince at the movement. "He underestimated me. Took mercy when he shouldn't have." Genma tsks loudly in fond annoyance, looking down at his unconscious comrade. Yeah, that's an ongoing problem of his. Big ol' bleeding heart. The man could be an absolute terror if he would just lose the damn empathy. The slightly clumsy sound of feet hitting the ground behind them precludes Naruto's entry to the conversation. "I mean, you're really pointing fingers for someone who didn't pull out my dad's technique till the last minute," the blonde calls to Genma, and his voice is far too friendly and Genma is far too dangerous for Sasuke to be okay with that. He steps pointedly in front of Naruto. The look the assassin sends Team 7 at being called out is friendly, but friendly like a barn cat is friendly with a mouse. "Man, and I thought all kids know about playin' with your food," he says with a grin that's just a bit too sharp around the edges. Sasuke stiffens in furious indignation and several of the Nikomata snarl, Ruri going as far to hiss, "Brave words for someone so bite-sized." Before things can escalate further, three new presences step into the clearing, and Genma, eyebrows climbing to his hairline even as he adjusts his arms more securely under Reida, whistles long and low. He shouts, "You've looked better, hey take." Kakashi, who is alive, thank all the gods, sighs so deeply as he flicks Genma off that Sasuke would be impressed if he wasn't busy frantically searching his sensei for the wound that led to so much blood soaking his arm and side. As if sensing his fear, Kakashi glosses Sasuke's way and offers him a reassuring smile. His Sharingan is closed tight and it's impossible to miss the way he's leaning against Shizoan, as though standing alone is an impossibility, but he is still alive, and at the end of the day that's all that matters. Even more obvious than his sensei's exhaustion, is Asuma's unconscious body, slung unceremoniously over one of Tsunade's broad shoulders. Genma, still impressively chipper considering the extent which he is now outnumbered, calls out again, "Please tell me you didn't kill Asuma. As his second, all the mission paperwork will fall to me if you did, and I would honestly prefer you just kill me too over that fate." Tsunade is the one to answer, striding forward to drop Asuma at the halfway point between Genma and the rest of the Uzushio renegades. "He's not dead, but in my professional opinion you'll want to get a medic for him soon if you want it to stay that way. Your friend there too from the look of him." Genma sighs bereftly, but his eyes are sharp and watchful, tracking the Sanin's movements cautiously. Even as tired as he is, even as worried for all his family, Sasuke has to fight down the urge to smirk at the way the assassin's uneasy eyes flick between the rest of them and Tsunade. And so the barn cat meets a lioness, he thinks, a little sardonically. "Nice to see you, Tsunade. You're heading out with Kakashi and his hellions?" Genma asks cheerfully. The greatest medic to ever walk the elemental nations tips her head thoughtfully, studying Genma. "I am," she responds finally, "I've run from my duty long enough." Genma shrugs emphatically, "Well, some would argue that your duty is in Konoha, but I won't fight you on your choice." "Smart boy. You wouldn't stand a chance if you did." Genma nods several times, looking a little pale despite himself. Well, on that completely unterrifying note, if you all wouldn't mind, I'm gonna grab my unconscious fucking comrades here, and carry them, gods, carry them back into Tokoshi. Sakura, bloody, clearly exhausted and still visibly shaken from Genma's use of the high ration only minutes before, sweetly asks the Konoha, are you going to be able to carry them okay? I know you must be sore. Genma's face slips from the performative humor that he favors to genuine confusion. Before he can respond, Sakura continues, sugary voice turning biting and mean and proud. I mean, we did absolutely kick your asses? It probably smarts a little, doesn't it, Genma-san? There is a single beat of shocked silence, and then Naruto, still pale and unsteady, drops a hand onto Sasuke's shoulder as he curls forward with laughter that rings like bells through the twilight forest. Sasuke grins too, and then laughs out loud himself when he hears Kakashi sigh again in helpless exasperation. Tsunade, still standing between the Takubetsu Jonin and the rest of Team 7, smirks at their antics. She turns bright, determined eyes towards Genma, who is watching them all with an unreadable look. Run along now, Konoha, she says, and Genma's face falls slightly at the name, at the clear line she is drawing in the sand regarding her alliances. As if she hadn't already driven the point home enough, the Sannin continues, you tell Danzo that I'm not some dog he can bring to heel. The Leaf hasn't been my village in decades, and it won't ever be again. Arms still full of his unconscious best friend, Genma gives one slow nod. Tsunade turns away from him, and Haori flaring out behind her dramatically, she strides past Team 7 and towards the northbound road. Let's go, you pests, she calls over her shoulder, we have a lot of ground to cover. Shizune immediately turns to follow her mentor, but Kakashi waits for a moment. The silver-haired Jonin leans against Yuji as he nods at Genma with a small, slightly bitter, half smile. I'm sure I'll be seeing you, Shiranui. Genma's face is unreadable again. Even with the keen spin of the Sharingan, Sasuke finds he's unsure what the assassin is thinking as he looks over their band of misfits. Finally, voice layered and quiet, the Takubetsu Jonin calls back, for the sake of you and your brats, I hope not. Keep your blades sharp, hey take. Sasuke and the rest of his team stare in shock for a few beats until Kakashi murmurs a command to get moving, and they collectively turn from the strange Konoha. Sasuke can feel Genma's bright, hazel eyes on them as they move away through the trees and northward towards the distant, familiar shores of Uzushio. He isn't sure if they made more enemies today or not, but Sasuke does know, with all the confidence in his bones, all the determination in his heart, that no matter what comes down the road, they were strong enough to survive today, and that matters more than anything else. Chapter 34, A Place to Die. In Uzushio, the winds are shifting. A typhoon is bearing down on the island. It's early in the season for such a storm, but from the bracing gusts rushing over the shore to the surf crashing against the docks to the feeling of humming tension growing steadily in the air, it's clear that the approaching downpour will be a fierce one. Yujito is perched on the low stone wall that marks the edge of Whirlpool's stonework quay. Her sandaled feet hang above the tossing storm-gray surf, and her face is turned toward the horizon, eyes closed, as the wind's invisible fingers snap her hair out nearly horizontally behind her. The two-tails Jinchuriki tastes ozone on the back of her tongue with each breath. The animalistic, feral instincts that are always running under her skin courtesy of the Nibi hum in anticipation as the barometric pressure drops. Madatabi, like Kurama, may be a spirit most at home in heat and wildfire, but Yujito herself has always loved a good storm. More than just filling her with anticipation this time, the pale blue lightning on the horizon and the massive curtain of rain descending right behind it makes her think of Kakashi. She hopes the Kopinin and his kids are okay. He's come to be something of a friend over the past several months, and the two-tails Jinchuriki would be lying if she said she wasn't worried. Yujito's Jinchuriki bond with Naruto is strong enough to know that the boy is at least alive, which is a strong hint that Kakashi, Sakura, and Sasuke are as well. However, with the disintegration of the 8 trigrams as well as the physical distance between them at the moment, the humming thread of shared awareness is tremulous, so she can't glean much beyond still alive. It's less informative than she'd like. The worry for someone else is still new, even after all this time. Her quiet is interrupted as she feels Gaara and Yotakata approaching at her back. The awareness that seems to be growing between the 4 Jinchuriki of Uzushio is still strange, but Yujito finds that she doesn't mind. She's never felt less alone. She shifts without greeting them, making room at her side for Gaara to settle next to her on the low wall, while on her other side Yotakata leans forward, resting his chin on arms crossed atop the stone. All three Jinchuriki stare out at the dark and raging ocean. Eventually, Gaara, apprehension vibrating down the mental string that ties him to Yujito, asks quietly, "We'll be okay in the archives when the storm hits, right?" Yujito turns slightly, cocking an eyebrow at him. She had nearly forgotten that the boy has likely never seen a typhoon before, desert dweller that he was for most of his life. She hums her assent and then wraps a comforting arm around his tense shoulders. Uzushio has survived many typhoons, and the mountain that the archives are built into even more. We'll be just fine. Gaara nods, instantly looking reassured, and that's another thing Yujito thinks she'll never get used to, being a source of comfort, of stability. Yotakata, black hair long enough now to be tied in a short ponytail at the nape of his neck, narrows his eyes at the horizon. His expression shifts from peaceful in the face of the rising storm to apprehensive. "There is a ship," he murmurs, the words nearly snatched away by the air rushing past them. The pric Klingonese under Yujito's skin catches like fire in dry straw. She doesn't doubt the younger Jinchuriki's eyes for even an instant. Yotakata and the Seiken are perceptive and detail-oriented. She trusts them both. Instead, Yujito immediately turns her own gaze toward the distant horizon. Flaring her pupils, black to gold, she lets the keen vision of Matatabi take over. Through their shared line of sight, she can see that Yotakata is right. Partly. There is a ship, riding the front edge of the storm and fighting against the towering waves. It's small, not quite a fishing vessel, but certainly not something meant to survive in an ocean this rough. She can't see details, only that it's unarmored, that it's sailing recklessly fast, and that it's heading straight for the island. Where Yotakata is wrong on his assessment, however, is that it's not a ship, it's two. Because following on the tail of the first, mostly hidden in the curtain of torrential rain, is a Kiri steamship. It dwarfs the smaller vessel, towering and formed of iron and built for war. Even from several miles away Yujito can see the hull reflecting with the flash of lightning and slick with rain water. Both are moving directly for not just Oizu, but for the narrow bay in which Uzushio itself is situated. "Fuck," hisses Yujito, leaping nimbly to her feet atop the wall. "You?" Gaara asks, still seated but looking up at her with wide, worried eyes. Yotakata stands to his full height too, eyes grim and trained on the horizon. "We've got company," Yujito explains, half snarling. Gaara spins back to the distant storm, narrowing his own eyes as he and Shukaku both try and make out the threat steaming towards them. Of course this would happen when Kakashi isn't here, Yujito thinks bitterly. Count on the lazy bastard to somehow duck the first serious threat to their new home that they've had to deal with. "How long till they arrive?" Yotakata asks. The Jonin studies the approaching threats and considers what she knows of steamships from her time fighting on the borders of Mist during the most recent series of skirmishes between Kumo and Kiri. Less than an hour, and with the storm wind pushing them it may be only 30 minutes, she decides after only a few moments. They'll both take some time to dock, so we should be able to go to ground before then, but it's not good that they are here at all. They could just be fleeing from the storm. Yotakata offers hopefully. She shakes her head. There are smaller island chains that would shelter a vessel that big much better than Uzushio's bay can. They are coming here for a reason. It might not have anything to do with us, Yotakata argues again, and Yujito would be more impressed that the young man has managed to remain such an optimist if they didn't so badly need to prepare for the worst right now. She's about to snap back at him when Gaara's voice, soft and shocked, announces, "There are two people running on the water." Yujito whirls, focuses her golden eyes again, and finds to her horror that the boy is right. There are two shinobi, still partly obscured by the roiling surf, running across the surface of the ocean directly for them. "We have to go now," she says, reaching to grab Gaara and haul him to his feet. If they run now they'll be able to make it to the archives and use the mountainside door to hide. With Sakura's new seals that allow for each of the Jinchuriki to open the passageway, it's absolutely the fastest way into the safety of the archives, but they still have to hurry and... "They see us," Yotakata announces, gentle but firm. Hand wrapped around Gaara's shoulder, Yujito turns again to the two figures. They are both moving fast, clearly shinobi and clearly ones who have grown up running on water to be moving so rapidly over such high surf. They are still a mile out, but they are inarguably beelining for the pier that the three Jinchuriki stand on. Yujito closes her eyes. She breathes the storm wind deep into her lungs and then pulls Gaara behind her. Well, we best say hello then. She doesn't hide the violence in her voice or the way that the claws on her fingers lengthen or the blue Jinchuriki fire that flickers to life in her aura, a mirror to the lightning flashing on the horizon before them. Yotakata pulls his bubble pipe from his robe and Gaara grips the back of Yujito's black shirt and all three of them wait. It only takes the two strangers another 4 minutes to get close enough for Yujito to see them well. They are both clearly of the mist. Each wears the standard blue and gray uniform of Kirinin, though Yujito can't make out any visible headbands. The male shinobi has the trappings of a Chunin. He's tall even from this distance and he has dark hair and skin. She can see the handle of what looks like a naginata sword on his back. Strange that he wouldn't have it drawn, she thinks. The kunoichi running at his side is more than a foot shorter than him. She has long, white hair that whips in the wind of the storm and the speed of her passage over the waves. She carries no visible weapons. Her flak jacket marks her as a Tokabutsu Jonin, and as the pair near, Yujito realizes that the gray material at her side is soaked through with blood. Now that she's recognized the injury, Yujito's sharp eyes pick up on the way that the Kiri kunoichi's steps are unsteady and how her partner halfway angles his body towards hers, as if waiting for her to fall and need to be caught. A thought prickles at the back of Yujito's mind, at her years of battle experience. These shinobi do not look like people running towards a fight, they look like people running away from one. Keeping Gaara tucked carefully behind her and ignoring how ridiculous that instinct is considering him and Shukaku's defensive capabilities, Yujito crosses her arms and waits as the pair of Kiri shinobi draw close. Yujito? Yotakata asks. We hear them out and kill them once we know why they're here. She says shortly, digging her claws into her sleeve as the pair of ninja finally stop about 15 paces short of the wall of the quay. Both of the shinobi are breathing heavily and the kunoichi slumps slightly the moment they stop running. One of her arms comes up to wrap protectively around her injured side. This close Yujito can see that she's not the only one of the pair that's injured. The Chunin at her side has a burn blooming across the right side of his face and singeing his collar. The bladed half of his naginata is red with only partly dried blood. Neither of the Kirinin appear surprised to find three Jinchuriki waiting for them on the dock. Yujito knows that if Sakura were here the little analyst would be asking a million questions. How did these Kiri shinobi know they are here? Do they know they are Jinchuriki or are they only expecting rogue ninja? Are they in contact with Konoha or Kumo or Suna? The only questions that matter to Yujito, however, are these shinobi a threat and how easily will they die if they are? Thunder echoes across the ocean and a gust of wind, stronger than all the others before rolls over the shores of Ozushio. Yujito lifts her voice above it, letting the cobalt fire that flares around her glow with threatening light. State your business. She's expecting the naginata Wilder to speak considering that his partner looks half dead on her feet, but the kunoichi is the one who steps forward to respond. We seek sanctuary, the woman calls over the howl of the wind, voice plain and unmemorable. Despite the fact that she is suffering under what is certainly a gruesome wound and dire straits, distress is barely apparent in her tone. She has deep brown eyes, and though Yujito knows that she and Matatabi could take the other shinobi apart easily, there is something in her gaze that sets the Yujito's teeth on edge. Even injured, even with a storm at her back, Yujito feels that this woman is a threat. Yujito narrows her eyes further, her instincts seething. There is no sanctuary here, she snarls, lies, Ozushio is nothing but a ruined husk and we are only travelers passing through. We can offer you nothing. A frown twists across the white-haired woman's face, not aggressive but demanding, halfway to desperate. Don't do me the disservice of playing games, Yujito of the Nibi. I know that these ruins have somehow been housing you and at least 2 other Jinchuriki if not more. The balance in Yujito's mind swings rapidly from hearing them out to burying them in a watery grave. Her claws dig deeper into her skin. Cat's out of the bag. Matatabi hums in her mind, pacing back and forth as she examines the furry kunoichi through Yujito's eyes. Not if we tear off their tongues before they can become loose. Yujito says back and she uncrosses her arms, deadly claws unfurling at her side. To the strangers still watching them from the unsteady surface of the bay, the uncrossed arms may be a gesture of relaxation. But for Yotakata and Gaara, who have spent the past many months with her, who have seen her sparring with Kakashi and who know exactly what her hands are capable of, the bared claws are the equivalent of drawing a katana from its sheath. It's a preparation for bloodshed. Gaara's hands tighten on the back of Yujito's shirt, and Yotakata, glancing to the side at her, steps forward and raising his normally quiet voice over the rising wind calls out. "Who are you? Why are you seeking asylum?" Yujito doesn't care what they say. If these enemy shinobi know about Uzushio, know about those who now call it home, then they have to die. The white-haired Jonin is watching Yujito measuredly, her stance confident even as the blood continues to steadily seep from the wound in her side. At his question she turns toward Yotakata and explains, "My name is Rai Hamatsu, I was a Tokabutsu Jonin of the Analysis Division in Kiri. This is Akito Horik, my partner, a Chunin from the Archival Unit." None of the Jinchuriki speak. Yujito still plans to take this woman's head, but she is going to find out everything she can about what brought her here first. Rai's voice is even, but the sweat beading at her brow speaks to her anxiety. Yujito tips her head and taps her claws against one another, wondering if it's the weight of her wound or the fear of these words being her last which are stressing Hamatsu more at the moment. "Akito and I were leaders of a recent attempt to unseat the new Mizukage. Those on the merchant sloop behind us are the few remaining members of that attempt and their families." "And the steamship?" Yotakata asks. His voice is quiet, almost kind, but the question is still blunt. The Six Tails vessel may be a gentle person at heart, but no Jinchuriki lives without learning to be cruel. The world won't let them. The guarded control that Rai has held till now slips and her face twists through rage, pain, mourning, before she grits out. "The steamship is one of the reasons there are so few of us left." Yotakata nods. There is no sympathy in the world of the great elemental nations for those who would challenge a cage. Coup attempts may not be unheard of, but mercy for those who carry them out is. "What exactly are you asking from us?" Rai opens her mouth again to speak and instead coughs harshly, blood spilling down her lips and splattering against her gloves as she tries to suppress the sound against her palm. Her partner, Akito, reacts instantly. Yujito tenses at his sudden movement, but the big man only moves to steady Rai, his face slipping from the strong mask he's worn to one of concern. With an arm around Rai, who is still gasping through far too much blood to speak, Akito answers. "We have nowhere to go. When our attempt to unseat Terumi failed, Rai directed us to run here. If we can't find shelter soon, every one of our people is either going to die at the hands of Terumi's shinobi on that steamer or at the hands of the typhoon." He raises eyes nearly wild with fear to first Yotakata and then Yujito. "Please, only 7 of us are shinobi at all, and that's including 2 genin. The other 26 on board are civilians. There are children. We are refugees and we don't know what else to dash." The roll of thunder cuts his increasingly frantic words off. Yujito looks out again to the ships bearing down on Uzushio, one, small and battered, apparently holding the huddled remains of an attempt to challenge the very system that drove her here to begin with, the other, a weapon of that same system. The steamship is massive, the iron hull dark and absolute, and the bustle of Kiri shinobi aboard it like a colony of ants. As far as Yujito is concerned, she and the rest of the Uzushio renegades have no part in this fight, no reason to put themselves at risk for these strangers who rolled the dice and lost. She will not jeopardize the first people she's let herself love in more than a decade for some unlucky Kiri rogues. It's Rai who breaks the silence. The blood on her teeth looks nearly black in the rapidly falling light as the typhoon makes its final approach, but her voice is strong and her eyes are on Yujito. "I knew you all were here," she states without flinching. "It's not an accident that brings us to your shore. My grandmother lives in Gyosan and she told me about the newcomers living in the hills. She told me that they are kind but strange and that one even ordered a blue haori styled for a shinobi." She coughs again, burying the sound in her torn sleeve before continuing, "I'm smart. Analysis is what I do, is what my family has done for generations, so figuring out that the 7 strangers she gushed about are the 7 rogues from Konoha, Kiri, Kuma, and Suna, especially when one of them has the last name Uzumaki, was no difficult puzzle. Damn it all, Naruto must have introduced himself with his real name at some point while in Gyosan," Yujito thinks. Out loud she snarls, "And now you've lead all of the elemental nations straight to our door." Rai shakes her head angrily, "No, I'm not a fool. Kiri's long-distance radios don't work over the ocean when the winds get too high, so we corrected our heading towards Oizu only once we were close enough to the typhoon that the steamship couldn't radio back to Terumi. Only the shinobi on that ship know we came here, and only me and my people know that here houses the lost Jinchuriki. Yujito doesn't flinch under the analysis. She stares down at the small, wounded woman and silently dares her to threaten the things that Yujito loves. Let her try and say that if Yujito doesn't let them onto the island, Rai will tell everyone they are here. She won't need to worry any more about the typhoon if she does, because Yujito will kill her where she stands without hesitation. Yujito will never again let herself be bent to someone else's will, and she will never let them threaten what is hers. The former Kiri Jonin wipes blood from her lips, and with grimaced defiance, she stares at the 3 runaway Jinchuriki on the docks above her. Here comes the threat, Yujito thinks, and she flexes her hands, preparing to leap for Rai's throat. Instead, Rai drops forward onto her knees. For a stunned moment Yujito thinks that the other kunoichi has lost consciousness, but it's not Rai's injury that is forcing her to kneel. It's her desperation. The Kiri Jonin bows low, presses her forehead against the surface of the tossing grey ocean, and in a voice so quiet that only a Jinchuriki's keen ears could hear it, she whispers, "Please." Something in Yujito's heart shudders, nearly folds. She should kill this woman and her companion and then grab Yotakata and Gaara and run. She should let the remainder of the misfortunate Kiri refugees die between Uzushio's ruined coast and the relentless steamship. She shouldn't care about them, shouldn't frown at the way that Rai seems barely able to stay atop the waves, the way that Akito keeps looking back at the merchant sloop as if to check and see that it's still sailing. Yujito's entire life has taught her that caring gets you nothing but pain. Her entire life except. Small warm hands grab at her elbow and turn her from where she's staring at Rai. The first kindness that Yujito has ever done, the first person she let herself care for in more than 10 years, stares up at her. Gaara's face, usually so cautious, usually so uncertain, is a riot of determination. Yujito stares back in shock. She has never seen such certainty on the young Jinchuriki's face. "We have to help them." His hands are tight on her arm and his pale eyes are unflinching from hers. "We can't," Yujito finds herself snapping back immediately, "we have no reason to and 1,000 reasons not to. They could lead to us being discovered, could sell us out." Yotakata agrees with her quietly, and he is already taking steps away from the bay, preparing to flee back towards the safety of the archives. It was beaten into him young, just like Yujito. Jinchuriki have to watch out for themselves. Fight and flight, it's all that broken, scared creatures know how to do. Gaara shakes his head furiously at both of them. His red hair swirls, not just with the wind of the typhoon but with Shukaku's grating chakra that rises around him like bloody mist. "No. Gaara." Yujito hisses, needing him to understand and agree, not able to finish this till he does, not sure why she needs him to understand at all. "Why would we help them? People like them would have never helped you or me or any Jinchuriki when we were hurting. Why should we put ourselves in danger to do the same for them?" The Ichibi's chakra flares around the boy with all the brightness of a desert sun. "Because it's what Naruto would want us to do." His exclamation echoes against the shattered stone of the nearby buildings and streets, louder than the wind, louder than the thunder, somehow louder than Yujito's fury and fear. She and Yotakata freeze. Both of them stare at Gaara in silence. It seems like such a ridiculous answer, such a childish one. Naruto is the youngest of them. He's loud and foolhardy and wouldn't know subtlety or strategy if it tap danced in front of his face. But Yujito can't help but remember the determination in his voice as he sat before them, months ago, and said, "We're going to do things differently. We're going to break the cycle of hatred and change the world." His smile, slightly crooked, with slightly too many sharp teeth, had been blinding. "We're going to make things better," the youngest, the smallest, the most powerful Jinchuriki had said, and Yujito, scarred, broken and until that moment fully on board with the idea that the world could go fuck itself, had for some reason agreed with him. The 7 of them and the Baijuyu are walking down a path that Naruto understands better than any of them. They are chasing a horizon, a dream, that he sees, maybe that only he sees. Yujito knows that she sure as fuck doesn't really understand, can't begin to even picture the destination. But maybe this is the first step. She takes a deep breath. "This is important to you?" she asks Gaara, flicking her gaze across his face, half praying that she'll find hesitation. There is none. It is, Gara tells her quietly and smiles in that tiny, awkward way that broke her heart the first time she saw it so many months ago and has been putting her back together every time she's seen it since. Little brothers, scoffs Madatabi with amusement/chagrin/fondness. Yujito doesn't smile, but she squeezes Gara's shoulder once tightly and then turning back to Rai and Akito she yells, "You're lucky the kid here has a bigger heart than me." Both of the Kiri shinobi sag in visible relief. Yotakata, following Yujito's lead even though she can still tell that the young man would much rather be running, nods at her decision. "Me and you can take out the steamship while Gara helps all the people into the archives," he says, glaring in determination across the water and rolling up the sleeves of his kimono. Yujito doesn't even consider the offer. "Absolutely not, you and Gara will get everyone inside and I'll handle the Kiri shinobi." Yotakata turns his glare to her, and she can see him mentally dig in his heels as he so often does when they argue. "Yujito, there are probably close to 50 enemy shinobi on that ship. I have more tails than you. Let me help." "More tails?" thinks Yujito incredulously as Madatabi hisses in indignation. "You also have no combat experience, so no, shut up." She waves away his attempts to interrupt her. "I don't care how tough that shithead who called himself your sensei trained you, you've never been in a fight of this scale before, so shut the fuck up about tails." Yotakata opens his mouth again to argue further and Madatabi's voice rises from Yujito's throat, cutting him off. "Seiken, if you and your pretty boy try and fight us on this, I'm going to tie all your tails together, and then when Kurama bitches at me about it, I'm going to tell him that you're the one who melted that tea country hot spring he liked so much 300 years ago." Yotakata snaps his mouth shut and stares at Yujito. Yujito raises an eyebrow. "You heard the cat," she says. "Naruto is 7 years younger than me. I'm not scared of him." Yotakata grumbles petulantly and then after a pause, more to himself than anything, "Fine, fine. Yes, Seiken, I understand that it was Kurama's favorite hot spring. No, I won't say anything, please stop yelling, you are so loud." Yujito gives Madatabi the mental equivalent of a fist bump. Akito, apparently unaware of the family spat on the docks above him, instead focusing on holding Rai steady as they begin to move closer to the pier, calls out, "We need to find a way to slow down the steamship so that the sloop can dock. Otherwise we won't have time to get our people into whatever shelter you all have." Yujito huffs out a laugh and seeing that Yotakata isn't going to fight her anymore, she hops off the wall onto the surface of the water and begins walking toward the horizon. "We don't need to slow down the warship, we just need to get your ship here faster." Akito frowns at her. "There is no way to make our vessel increase pace any. We've already pushed the engines to their absolute capacity." Yujito laughs again and the sound is as friendly as the sharp-toothed smile she bears at Akito, which is to say not at all. Ignoring the man's flinch, she calls back over her shoulder, "Gara? Want to show off a little?" The one-tails Jinchuriki looks at her with wide eyes and then to the Kiri rogues. "Are you sure?" he asks nervously. Yujito turns around to face him, Typhoon at her back. Throwing her arms open she grins, wide and bloodthirsty. "If we're going to do something stupid, why don't we show off a little while doing it? None of us have gotten to fully stretch our powers in months, hell maybe years for you." Akito is looking at Yujito like she's crazy. The boat is still at least a mile out. "He's a little boy. What are you suggesting he do?" Before Yujito can laugh at him again or snarl that he knows nothing about what she or Gara or any of the Jinchuriki are capable of, Rai speaks. "He may be a kid, Ito, but he's a Jinchuriki first. They don't play by the same rules as the rest of us. My mom died learning that, don't forget." "Interesting," Yujito thinks, filing that information away for later. She has more important things to focus on right now, however. She watches proudly, heart thundering in her chest as the red-haired 14-year-old she rescued so many months ago steps up onto the edge of the stone pier and extends his pale hands out over the bay. Gara, just like the rest of them, has been growing stronger since he came to Uzushio. Surrounded by people who love instead of fear him and finally steady in his bond with Shukaku, the one-tailed Jinchuriki has become well, Yujito feels that she's allowed to use the word monster in this instance. There is a tremble to the air, a feeling like a plucked string as the bond that ties Yujito indescribably to the boy on the pier above her shudders and vibrates with swelling energy. Gara begins to glow. He doesn't carry the gourd anymore, but sand still drifts into the air around him, each grain shining like a tiny star and spinning around him faster and faster as his power uncurls and builds. A bushy tail of pure pale yellow chakra swirls to life behind him, and his eyes shift from pale green to the golden cross of Shukaku. The voice of the Ichibai, deep and coarse, rolls from Gaara's mouth as a smile curls across his face. "At least a mile out," he said. "Still a kid," he said. "As if any of that could stop us. Idiot human. Niceties have never been my youngest brother's strong suit." Madatabi purrs smugly as a distant but growing rumble begins to fill the air around them. The power swirling around Gaara condenses, and the rumbling grows louder until it's greater than the howling wind of the typhoon, greater than the roar of Yujito's own heartbeat. On all sides of them, streaming up from the ground, from beyond the quay and from under the waves, is a tsunami of sand. Hundreds of strands of the fine black oasis sand swirl into the air, gathering to hang above them in a rapidly expanding mass. Gaara extends his hands even further, pale fingers trembling as his powers work into the earth itself, Shukaku reaching through him and drawing on the element that the sage of Sixth Paths wove into his very being 1,000 years ago. "Gods," Akito whispers, pulling a shocked Rai against his side. Shukaku and Gaara turn glowing golden eyes to Akito, and the sand swirls even faster around and above them all. "Call us boy again and we'll scrape the skin from your bones," the twining voices of the one-tailed demon and his vessel promise. Yujito and Yotakata can both feel the amusement vibrating down the connection they have with Shukaku and Gaara, but Akito can't, and by the look on his face the Chunin seems to seriously be considering facing the typhoon and the steamship over Gaara. Looking away from the terrified shinobi standing on the waves beneath him, Gaara focuses again on the task at hand. He flexes his hands back, pulling and molding the immense flood of sand, and then with a snarling breath he sends it flying out over the ocean towards the distant ships. All four shinobi on the dock watch in amazement as the second youngest Jinchuriki, the weakest Jinchuriki by most measures, effortlessly slings what is easily 1,000 tons of sand across the surface of the ocean and wraps it securely around the sides of the merchant sloop holding the remains of Akito and Rai's revolution. Gaara twists his hands again, single tail thrashing behind him as the sand shifts, and then begins to lift the cradled vessel out of the water entirely. "Hope your people know how to hold on." Shukaku calls to the mist rogues, and then he yanks the sand-wrapped ship back toward them, sending it skipping across the surface of the waves like a stone from a sling. Gaara drop it at the mountain. Then Yotakata can use his bubbles to get all four of you up there and everyone inside before the storm breaks. Yujito calls, unable to keep even an ounce of the feral joy from her voice as Gaara telekinetically moves something several thousand times bigger than him as easily as he would a handful of shuriken. Both of the younger Jinchuriki nod at her orders. "Be careful." Yotakata calls, and Gaara, still focused on the ship, sends her another tiny smile. "Nii." Yujito turns to look. Rai is holding herself up on Akito's arm, skin as pale as her hair with the blood loss. There is a design flaw in most of the Kiri steamships. If you block the valve that lets the steam off gas, the ship's engine will blow. That would have been helpful to know a few years ago when I was fighting you missed fuckers for Kumo. She shrugs, walking away from Uzushio and out towards the steamship. "Oh well, should be plenty fun now." Akito shouts after her as she nears the end of the piers, "You won't make it back before the storm breaks on foot." "I lived in mist my whole life. No human can water walk in the middle of a typhoon. Even if you can sink the steamer, the storm will overwhelm you." Yukishio ignores him. She kicks her sandals off and begins to walk out onto the surface of the open tempestuous ocean. Instead of trying to ride the waves like Akito and Rai had, she gathers a drop of Madatabi's endless, fiery chakra and sends it swirling around her, making the air flicker and snap with heat. The waves begin to flatten and smooth under her, each step she takes coiling with the pressure of super-dense chakra. The winds that were buffeting her only moments before now break against her and fall to the sides, nothing in the face of the energy she cloaks herself in. A typhoon may be fierce, may force most shinobi, most humans, to hide away and take shelter, but Yujito is not most shinobi, and she is not solely a human. She is a Jinchuriki, and she is as much a force of nature as the storm bearing down on her is. Yujito doesn't turn around to see the look on Akito and Rai's faces, but walks through the towering waves towards the nearing typhoon, alone. Except no, because Jinchuriki are never alone. Madatabi stretches, letting her full chakra awaken and bloom in Yujito's chest. Like so many months ago, Yujito's senses sharpen and the claws on her hands and bared feet lengthen. A cloak of fiery blue energy whirls to life around her, two tails extending and beginning to flick back and forth across the surface of the ocean. The water where her tails and feet touch boils instantly, the plumes of steam marking her passage as she stalks towards the ship bearing down on her. Plan. Madatabi asks with a pleased hum. They've already been seen. Yujito can hear the frantic shouts of the shinobi on deck as they scramble for their positions. That's fine, stealth has never been her style anyway. Put the ship on the bottom of the ocean. That's the plan, she informs her feline passenger. Just little old us? Against a whole steamship full of untold enemy shinobi? Madatabi asks, failing to hide the smile in her voice. You're right, Yujito responds, grinning back twice as sharp as the Nibi. It may be a little overkill. Madatabi laughs, scorching, and free as fire on the plains. Let's show them what an unchained Jinchuriki can really do then, kitten. Yujito doesn't have to say anything back, her agreement is spelled out in every line of her body as she breaks into a jog and then a sprint, heading straight for the ship. As she nears the towering vessel and feels the bloom of killing intent of more than 40 shinobi on board preparing for battle, Yujito closes her eyes for a moment. Once upon a time, she would have been happy for this to be the end of her story, the end to the miserable mockery of a thing she had called a life. But the winds have shifted. Come what may, come cannon fire and enemy nin and bloodshed, come broken bones and lightning and pain, Yujito knows she will not die here, that she cannot die here. She has people waiting for her. She has promises to keep. She has Kakashi to commiserate with and Yotaka to bicker with and Sasuke and the Nikomata to train and Sakura to guide and Naruto to follow. She has Gaara. She has a family. She has an entire journey ahead of her and a world to shatter, and she will not die here. Above her lightning crackles across the sky and thunder roars. Yujito tips her head toward the heavens right as the typhoon breaks. She feels Madatabi's own roar echo through her bones, louder than anything this storm could throw at her, and without fear, without pause, she leaps for the deck of the steamship. Chapter 35, Nothing But Vultures. When Obito decided to become the leader of the most dangerous terrorist organization in all the elemental nations, he had been fully prepared for the scheming, subterfuge, and politics that came with the position. Even in his first weeks in the organization he had understood. Only 18 years old and just a few months out from his failed attack on Konoha, with his wounds still healing and Kushina and Minato's deaths dogging his steps, and with every thought screaming with loss, rage, he had understood. Being a leader was not all destruction, all battle, all violence. It was thinking 10, no, 20 steps ahead. It was making the rational call. Obito had learned that the hard way with the failure of the Kyuubi attack. When he let his fury overpower his intellect, his planning, he failed. Madara would have laughed at how sloppy and short-sighted the Kyuubi plan had been. Maybe he would have beaten Obito for it too. Power is a game, the cruel old man used to sneer. The shinobi who thinks the furthest ahead, who knows the moves to achieve his goals, is the one who lives, who wins. It's advice that Obito holds close. Even after all the tortures that Madara put him through, even with how much he hated the old bastard, Obito cannot pretend he wasn't brilliant. All that to say, Obito understands, often even relishes the fact that his role in the remaking of the world has been one that is nearly clerical. He's the puppeteer behind the strings, the player moving the pieces on the board, the conductor of the song. He chooses who joins Akatsuki, where they go, and what they do. He parses through intel from their informant networks, balances rosters and checkbooks, and bends the currents of the world's bloody ongoings to best suit Madara's dream, his dream. But sometimes even he has to get into the fucking trenches, he supposes. They're on the border of the land of rivers. Obito, or rather, Tobi, is following along with Konan, Itake, Kisame, Deidara, and Sasori. In total it's nearly half of the manpower of the Akatsuki, a show of force that could level mountains, could bring any cage to their knees. However, the fucking drug kingpin that has necessitated them being here doesn't even have enough brain cells bouncing around in his ugly bald head to look scared as one of his budget henchmen opens the tall double doors, allowing the Akatsuki members into his reception room. Shunweno, the drug kingpin in question, grins at them. His teeth are yellowed from a lifetime of booze and smoke, and his voice is deep and grating as he calls the delegation from Akatsuki. So great of you all to make it out here in this rain. He leans back in the high back-padded chair that sits at the center of the wide room and looks over their party as if he would a particularly intriguing group of traveling circus performers. Ueno is an important man, Obito will give him that. He currently sits at the head of the second largest drug-running operation in the entirety of the elemental nations. He's held the position for a little over 3 months now after he had slit the last boss's throat in his sleep. From what Obito has heard from their sources, Ueno garnered a following of something close to 500 mercenaries, rogue ninjas, and poor criminals and overran the forces of the last organization head. Then the new kingpin had so violently repressed the outcry against his standing that in less than a fortnight he and his followers were comfortably at the pinnacle of the Cebu drug cartel. This is something of a problem for Obito, for Akatsuki, because under its old management the Cebu was paying them a rather lofty protection fee several times a year. The time is coming for that fee to be due and Ueno and his people haven't made any move to reach out and send it their way. Without that padding, financing the Akatsuki's operations is going to become rapidly challenging. So here there are, the 6 of them in the middle of a fortress guarded by nearly 500 swords for hire. Obito hopes that it doesn't come down to a fight. He would hate the mess of having to find a way to restaff such a large and powerful organization. Ueno, still smiling at them, gestures to the cushions on the ground in front of the low table between the Akatsuki and him. None of them sit. Instead, standing up on his tiptoes and pinwheeling his arms like a child, Toby chirps in the high, childish voice he's adopted for this role, "Wow. There are so many big tough guys here. I'm a little scared." The statement echoes gratingly in the large room. The 50 or so armed men that are visible around the wide space turn their heads to look at him incredulously. Obito wants to scoff. 50 guards is both a clumsy, ham-handed, display of power, and also a foolish move strategically. If it comes to blows they'll be more likely to fall on each other's damn swords than actually hit any of his people. "Shut your idiot mouth," Sasori snarls from behind the cloth that covers his mouth without deeming Toby worthy of even the drop of chakra it would take to turn his puppet's head to actually glare his direction. "See Sasori-san, that's Deidara," leaning down to pout pointedly into Sasori's masked and rigid face. "You're always calling me an idiot, but at least I'm not as stupid as Toby is, eh? Maybe think of that next time you're yelling at me, eh? Deidara, if you don't also shut your equally idiotic mouth then I'm going to sew it shut for you." Kisame, a few steps behind them, lets out a short huff of amusement at their expense, shifting Samahata on his massive shoulders as he looks around the room. "Hell of a welcome party," the swordsman drawls. Itake, dwarfed by his partner's height but with a presence like death itself, gives a quiet hum of assent. The youngest member of the Akatsuki, always reserved and quiet, has been a ghost of his former self since the news about his missing brat of a brother reached him. The 18-year-old sticks in Kisame's shadow like the sun will turn him to ash if he steps beyond it and speaks only when absolutely necessary. Obito isn't quite sure why he hasn't run back to Konoha yet. Most likely that bastard Danza wants his little mole to keep reporting to him, or maybe Itaka thinks that Akatsuki has a better chance of finding Sasuke than anyone else. Either way, Obito appreciates the young man's foolish dedication to his brother. If it keeps him around so that Obito can use him, then it's good enough for him. Konan, ever the most professional of the lot, ignores all of them pointedly and steps forward until she's only a few feet in front of the throne-like chair that their host is lounging in. She does not bow. Her voice is cold but calm as she addresses Ueno. "Greetings, Ueno-san. Thank you for taking the time to see us." The kingpin tips one shoulder in a half shrug and his grin morphs into a sneer as he unapologetically drags his eyes over Konan's form. "Not so much of a problem for me when the seeing is so easy on the eyes, my dear." Obito cannot see Konan's face from where he and the others still stand behind her, but from watching the strong line of her back under the black fabric of her Akatsuki robe there is no outward sign that the comment even registers with her. Kisame, however, lets out a small rumbling growl at the disrespect and Deidara's bored expression slips instantly into heated annoyance. Sasori is as still as ever, as expressionless, but Obito's sharp eyes can easily see the way that the nearly invisible threads of chakra that puppet his body tighten and relax in agitation. Barely diverting his attention to think about his act since nearly 90% of his focus is on Konan's strong back and the man leering at her, Toby leans over to Sasori and stage whispers. I don't get it. Is Ueno-chan saying that he's old and needs glasses?" The slimy look slides off Ueno's face at Toby's words and he glares at him over Conan's head. Toby gives an exaggerated shriek of fear at the look and then leaps behind Kisame's broad back before peeking out from under one of his massive arms. Seemingly appeased that the interruption has been dealt with, Ueno turns his gaze back to Conan. Your people need to be taught how to behave. I know the old boss had good relationships with you fuckers, but I expect to be treated with respect by underlings. We don't need them to behave, we need them to be good at what they do. Nothing in Conan's posture or voice has changed. She's as calm as a frozen pond. But Obito has known her since he was 18 and she was 23. He has worked alongside her for more than 10 years to create the organization they are here representing today. He knows how to spot the dragon that is waking beneath the icy veneer of her apathy. Ueno tsks loudly, leaning sideways in his chair and glaring towards the group of them again. Good at what you do, you say. See, that's where I have some problems cause I don't know what exactly it is that you people actually do. Everyone speaks about you Akatsuki in whispers like you are fucking Shinigami or something. Akatsuki this, Akatsuki that. He spits to the side. Apparently old Wado was even afraid enough of you bastards that he forked over nearly 15% of our revenue every year. 15%. Conan offers coolly, he knew what our protection was worth, and what staying on our good side was as well. Don't try and talk worth with me, sweetheart. Do you have any idea how much 15% of our yearly revenue is? There, the first crack in her calm demeanor, a flicker of killing intent that has the rest of them straightening slightly and their adrenaline spiking. Ueno doesn't notice a thing. Yes, I happen to be one of the generals in Akatsuki. I am in fact privy to what 15% of your revenue is. Ueno scoffs loudly, a general huh? You? No wonder everyone is so scared of you fuckers. The sarcasm in his words is stark to the point of becoming an insult even without the contemptuous words. Conan's rage flickers again, grows. Kisame rolls his massive shoulders and stretches, one thumb sliding on the hilt of his sword to loose the bandages that keep it bound. Itaki on Kisame's right side turns slightly, so his back is facing the swordsman and closes his eyes as if he were tired. Ueno, we did not come here today to be insulted. We came here to collect what is due. The kingpin laughs, loud and uproariously. Several of the men around the room join him in his cruel mirth. Deidara sticks his hands into his weapon's pouch and the minuscule sounds of crunching begins to drift from within, explosive clay being ground down. There is the faintest creak of wood as Sasori's chakra threads flex again, as hidden weapons are activated. Ueno, stupid as he is, doesn't notice a thing. The kingpin laughs until he cries and then he stands from the throne and walks forward till he's right in front of Conan. You came here to the headquarters of the Cebu, the ONI of the West, with yourself and 5 men, and you intend to collect what is due. Yes. Conan does not flinch at his proximity or at his weaponized disbelief. He throws his head back and laughs loudly again, his yellow teeth flashing in the low lighting. And what if I say no and decide to kill you sorry sons of bitches instead? Ueno asks the question like he's just made the winning move in a game of shogi. We will make an example of you, Conan answers like it's a fact. My men would stop you from even touching me. He steps closer to her. An example of all of you. Conan does not step back. Ueno is so close to his general now that Obito can see her blue hair stirring at the edges of her face from his breath. You and what army? Conan does move now, a small half-turn that has her glancing back toward the rest of them. Her face is serene, hands relaxed at her sides. But the ice is gone. Her golden eyes are flashing like dragon fire. Her gaze finds Obito's. This is why the leader of the Akatsuki is here today. Why he is in the trenches for this encounter and not back at the mountain's graveyard having his will dispensed and his hands undirted. Ueno has been a problem since he took power months ago. More than just refusing to make his tithe, the man is vocal about his lack of fear, his disbelief about the threat that Akatsuki poses. He loudly claims that the criminal underworld is foolish in their fear of the organization that calls itself Dawn and yet wraps itself in darkness and blood and power. Others are starting to listen to his doubts, and while it is true that Obito has bigger things to worry about right now, such as 5 missing Jinchuriki, he won't let someone as insultingly stupid and inconsequential as Shun Ueno challenge the dream he is trying to build. Whether Ueno knows it or not, The moment Akatsuki walked in his door he was standing trial and Obito as judge, jury, and soon to be executioner. Obito has had more than enough time to read this man. He ran the calculations, analyzed the other's movements and speech and leadership abilities. Ueno has come up lacking. He is not a tool worth wielding. With his serrated smile hidden behind his mask, Obito flashes Konan a single hand sign. Terminate. Konan doesn't have to nod to show she understands. She turns back to Ueno. We don't need an army for you or your men. One doesn't send an army to kill ants. Ueno's face pales with rage at the insult. You can't, he snarls and raises a hand as if to backhand Konan. He freezes. Looks down in confusion at where his hand once was. Blood gushes out of the neatly serrated stump as a single sheet of paper flits delicately back to Konan and Ueno screams. And then he stops screaming because Konan extends her pale, slender fingers and with a flick, exactly like she was getting rid of a crawling ant, she sends a wave of papers to wrap around Ueno's head in a perfect, suffocating cocoon. The kingpin of the ONI of the West begins to claw desperately at his face, his severed wrist leaving gruesome streaks of blood against the white paper as his brain tries to utilize a hand that it still hasn't fully processed as lost. As he drops to his knees, Konan turns and walks back to them without so much as a glance at the man she's left writhing on the ground or the severed hand next to him. The sounds of Ueno's terrified struggles are the only sounds in the room. Konan's footsteps are completely silent after all. The rest of the present Akatsuki are waiting patiently when she reaches them. Kisame, Itake, clean out their coffers. Every single ryo of Cebu's belongs to us now. Deidara, Sasori, finish with anyone outside this room. Toby, you and I are going to clean up here. Whatever spell that had been holding the sellswords frozen as they watched Ueno's fading struggles breaks suddenly and the room explodes into movement. War cries surround them on all sides and warning bells begin to sound. None of the Akatsuki members spare a glance for the enemies descending on them. You ready to go Itake? Kisame asks glancing down at the pale young man at his side. Itake hums once in agreement and when he opens his eyes the manga Kyoshirinon spins lazily in his gaze. Time to have some fun, Deidara grins, tossing long blonde hair over his shoulder as he draws his hands from the pouches at his belt. Tiny white spiders made of blasting clay swarm up from his hands into the sleeves of his robes. Noisy growls Sasori at his young partner's enthusiasm but Obito can still see the way the puppet's strings flex with anticipation. Konan claps her hands together once, let's get to work. The four rogues leap away, faster than any normal eye could track. Obito knows that their bloody work will be done quickly and correctly. His tools are the best after all. Konan and Toby are left alone in a rapidly shrinking circle of mercenaries who are creeping closer. The sellswords are watching the two of them intently with wide, fearful eyes and watching each other even closer, desperately hoping someone else will be the first to take a swing at the black and red-robed killers in their midst. Fucking battle fodder, Obito thinks with annoyance. The moment that he's sure the other Akatsuki are gone, Obito sheds Toby's persona like a mold-infested coat. He straightens his shoulders and cracks his knuckles as he watches the weaklings nervously pacing around Konan and him. How long till Ueno suffocates completely? He asks the blue-haired woman. Konan summons a piece of paper and gently floats it around her head like a fluttering butterfly as she thinks. Several of the sellswords near her watch the paper with fascinated eyes and Obito nearly laughs. Fools, they truly have no idea that in the world of shinobi the most beautiful things are often the most deadly. He probably has 1 more minute until he has permanent brain damage and 5 more minutes until he's dead. Why? Were you hoping to keep using him? Obito had considered it. If he decides to let the kingpin live, Ueno will have thoroughly learned his lesson about respecting them the proper amount, and will probably even be willing to pay more money to Akatsuki moving forward. Furthermore, allowing him to live would be less work than trying to select a satisfactorily meek but capable new head for the Cebu cartel. However, Obito pictures the leer on the man's face as he had looked at Konan, remembers the perfectly relaxed posture his oldest ally had maintained through the entire exchange and the way she had turned to him and waited for his verdict even with the bloodlust burning in her eyes like hellfire. Obito is not a sentimental man. He is not a caring man, or a one who prioritizes something as foolish as affection over the smartest move in his grand game. But Konan is important to him. Important to his plans. Recently she's been angry at him, distant like she hasn't been since he joined the organization at 18. Obito finds to his great annoyance that it's distracting, unsettling. It's been nearly 4 months since they lost the Rokubai and since Obito lost his temper and attacked Nagato. She should be over it by now, some petulant, childish part of him rages. It was months ago and Nagato is fine, but there is still a shadow in her eyes when she looks at him now. More than the caution she has always handled him with, more than the sadness, she's still angry. Conan's golden eyes look at him and Obito feels shame. He hates it. And he knows that he owes her. No, he answers her after only a moment's pause, we don't need scum like him in our new world. It's as close to an apology as he'll ever be able to say out loud. But knowing someone goes 2 ways and in the same way that Conan, cold and stoic and deadly as she is an open book to him, she can read his true intentions too. She can see beyond Obito's masks, beyond Madara. So Conan hears Ueno's condemnation for what it is. Atonement. She turns fully to him and her face softens, sending him a tiny, barely there smile. It's not forgiveness but it's an acknowledgement. The shadow fades from her eyes and Obito finds to his irritation that he can breathe lighter. The universe isn't ready to let him off as easily as Conan is, though apparently, because behind her back, right in her blind spot, a shift of movement catches Obito's eye. It's one of the mercenaries, and he's moving faster than the others and Obito's Sharingan catches a flash of scored metal on the man's forehead. The leader of the Akatsuki doesn't have time to shout before the rogue ninja they somehow missed in the ranks of Ueno's sellswords is whipping a hand towards Conan's back, his fingers blackening and shooting forward in jagged spikes. Obito's mind, always moving and scheming, always screaming, is completely silent. There is no time to wonder how Ueno got a rogue shinobi with a Kekkai Genkai that impressive on his payroll. No time to figure out the cleverest way to stop the attack streaking towards Conan. No time to weigh the pros and cons and usefulness of the different pieces at play. No time to do any of the things that Madara beat into him until they were as instinctual as breathing. He moves. Kamui whirls to life at his command and Obito, in front of Conan in one moment, appears at her back the next. He grabs the wrist of the rogue ninja with the Kekkai Genkai and twists, snapping bone as easily as dry wood. The man lets out a howl of pain and swings blindly at Obito's side with this other hand. There is a flash of pain but it is inconsequential. Obito reaches forward with his other hand and crushes the shinobi's throat. There is a roar in his ears and fire in his blood. He feels like ripping the dead man's heart out from his chest for daring to threaten what is his. Conan doesn't shout but Obito can still feel her shock at his actions in the slightly imperfect construction of the paper shuriken that fly over his shoulders to bury themselves in the eye sockets of the 2 swordsmen who lunge at him from behind, the corpse of the rogue still dangling from his grasp. Obito drops the dead man and without waiting launches himself into the crowd. He doesn't need the gunbei or his chains for this enemy. His rage is more than enough of a weapon. The sellswords fall under his hands like saplings before a tsunami. Bones break under Obito's fingers and organs rupture under his kicks. Dancing alongside him through the carnage he spreads are swirling white kunao and senbon and shuriken, beautifully delicate and precise even with the blood that slowly stains them crimson. Conan's art, a contradiction in motion. Between the two of them the men in the room don't last more than 2 minutes. By the time the rage starts to die in Obito's blood, the wooden floor has become a lake of blood. His hands still tremble with adrenaline and he knows the orange spiral of his mask is splattered with gore. Conan, untouched by the carnage that surrounds them, makes her way over to him. Obito starts to turn towards her and then finds to his surprise that he's tipping towards the floor, black flashing across his vision. Conan is in front of him in an instant, one arm supporting him tentatively and eyes worried and calculating as they flash over him and "You're hurt," she says, failing to bury the shock the statement seems to bring her. Obito shrugs. The pain that is now registering through the fading hum of battle is nothing compared to the agony he's endured in the past. "You got hit stepping between me and that rogue." She's not asking him, so Obito just shrugs again, glad for the mask that hides the annoyance that flashes across his face. "Your guard was down. I ran the calculations and decided to intervene." He means it to diminish the action, to obfuscate the vulnerable reality of the fact that he moved without thinking. She sees right through him. If the shadow in her eyes was banished by his condemnation of Wenno, the warmth is returned by his foolishness. The way she looks at him now reminds him of his first months in the organization, reminds him of the fact that though she is one of the most dangerous women in the world, in her center, Conan is kind. Foolish, weak, unwanted, undeserved, Obito's mind snarls in a voice that sounds so much like Mandara it's nearly laughable. He twists away from of her supporting arm and steps backward pointedly. Obito dash, she starts, exasperated concern creeping into her voice. Save your pity for someone who deserves it, he growls at her, concentration split as he drops a hand to his side and uses a flash of healing chakra to slow the blood seeping from the gash in his flank. It's not pity and you do deserve it. Conan argues with him quietly. The gentleness in her voice is antithetical to the blood slowly seeping into the hems of her robes. Obito snorts. Foolishness, weakness. Her and him both. He cannot fix what is broken in the world by being this soft. Affection is an opioid and love is a blind spot. Both make you vulnerable. We need to go find the others, he growls, turning away from her further and ignoring the horrid ache in his chest. He doesn't look back at her as he steps over the bodies littering the floor. Conan follows in his steps without another word. Check the description for the links to the author.